Right, this is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter. And you know how, when the recent major was announced, and then dusT took out like that skywriting across every sky around the world to say that he was doing the major, you found out a piece of trivia a lot of people probably didn't know, which was that was his first ever major. Even though he did all those events in CS, that was the first ever major he did. And similarly, we're also going to sort of correct a former ill of the industry. This is sort of like when you get the Oscar like way later than when you were actually, you know, the best or whatever, because it turned out dusT has never been on Snake and Banter, which seems impossible, right? Because it feels like we've had almost every single person in the world on Snake and Banter, but apparently we didn't. I guess dusT must have perfectly overlapped with when he did his Valorant pivot, and then also he was a caster before. Also, there's the downside of being a caster. See, other people go, casters, they're great at talking about the game, but I'm like, yeah, that's all they do. They're not thinkers. Leave the thinking to the analysts. You guys just, any old shite coming out your mouth, keep it going, keep the hype up. And then we all know it's all bollocks anyway. And they're all like congratulating Snacks for getting kills and stuff. So shout out to whoever you are who does that. If you keep doing it, mate, I'm going to keep dry roasting you, but just in a very polite man like this, because I do actually like that person, but fuck talking about Snacks. So anyway, the point is, dust is here. He is here now.
Yeah,
we're gonna make.
I appreciate you telling him that I was at the major because I didn't think I had done a good enough job letting people know. So I really appreciate it. Yeah,
I mean, if anyone's wondering, even though he was on the PGL broadcast, they only did the broadcast. That is actually the Perfect World Major. So I know you can get confused with these things. You can get confused.
Very confusing indeed.
Exactly. But all that matters is whoever signs dusT checks, they're cool as fuck. So now that we've established that, listen, Maui did that for the first year. It's all good. We've all been there. So
we got to do it.
I think Maui actually once did. Didn't you once do one? I did it as a joke for the Espo one. I think Maui once did do one that was basically sort of like, aren't these desks brilliant at this event? Like when he just got out like Blast or something. He did have one that was like ridiculous back in the day.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, let's just say as soon as I stopped doing it about ESL desks, they stopped hiring me. So that is what it is.
Okay. Right. It turns out there was like an actual glazing strategy there that was working. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It was the only thing keeping me in with ESL, actually. Everybody else just likes me flat out.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Anyway, dusT, obviously, when someone, I mean, it is your first time anyway, but as I always say, we operate the Fight Club rules. You have to start the first point. So what is your good point you're bringing to the show?
Yeah, so my good point was actually me working the desk at the major.
There you go.
I felt like me and Maui had amazing synergy as a duo on the desk. Tech Girl, amazing host, like the three of us.
Agree.
Richard also fantastic, of course. Like, that just felt like a crush. No, okay. I had to pay that one off from Feed the Trolls. So, or let's get serious now. So my good point is just the major playoffs in general. And the reason for this is, for one, it was a really cool finite into the year season. We didn't have anything else going on afterwards. It's kind of just a stamp to the end of 2024. I felt like we got all the top teams except for NAVI, so you got a fantastic bracket, in my opinion. And then throughout the course of the playoffs, it just felt like you had some banger games and storylines play out. So examples would be like Moguls being the first team from East Asia to make a major playoff after 11 years. I mean, that was pretty awesome. You know, you have Liquid in the year as a top 10 team. Mouz continued to be top 5. That G2 Heroic match was an absolute banger, best of 3 in the quarterfinals. That is to see it go that deep, go into overtime. Heroic kind of continue their upward trajectory as like kind of that shocker team that made the playoffs. Obviously, the whole run from FaZe, like the miracle run, beating Vitality and G2 to run all the way to the grand finals. Really, the only bad marks about it was that, you know, Vitality petered out and NAVI didn't make it. But outside of that, you had so many incredible storylines, obviously culminating in the fact that Spirit wins it all, you know, tying NAVI for 4 titles this year, including a major, and then donk solidifying himself as one of the best players in the world and like the rookie of the year, basically. So just, I thought the entire playoffs was incredible.
Yeah, I just like that it tied or wrapped up so many of the stories and gave us, in some ways, answers. If you were on the fence about who's your number one, well, now you have an answer. If you're wondering who the team of the year is, I think that's probably the only question that still probably remains that is worth diving deeper into. But it's cool to see FaZe have a resurgence as well. I mean, there's so many ways you could take this. Even the teams that are kind of on the come up right now, like say Liquid and Heroic, the Mongols, all getting a shot in the quarterfinals. For them to reach that culmination where they're actually, you know, getting into the top 8 at the major, in some ways, probably incorrectly, you could equate that for being top 8 in the world. I feel like those teams are on that trajectory. I don't know if I'm going to put Liquid in top 8 right now, for example, but you know, it's nice to see a lot of the best teams in the world the world duke it out, and to see some of them kind of collapse in ways that have it's been befitting of what they've done so far this year, like the way G2 does versus FaZe, the way Vitality does versus FaZe. I think it had a lot of great little micro narratives that are all baked into the overall picture, which is that, FaZe, great CS2 team, but on any given day, it seems like a team that's really firing can't win, which is what Spirit did.
I do think in general, like, people get so jaded about major playoffs when, like, they either have the bad teams, so it's not going to be memorable because you just don't even remember some teams made major playoffs if they lose immediately, or you have them where, like, you have the good teams, that's happened before, but then the bracket just ends up being crap, like everything's a 2-0, or, the game's about to get exciting, but it doesn't quite. You actually had some, if people forget, you had some really good games. Like, I'll give you the obvious examples, which is, first of all, even though people are going to be mourning the Mongols not making it, the Mongols before the playoffs murked everyone. They looked awesome. And they obviously in the second Swiss played really good teams too. Even though they never really got pushed to elimination. They just walked through everyone. But then even in the playoffs, everyone's going to delete this from their memory now. I saw all your fucking coins. You all had the fucking Mongols winning that game, you little rats. So when the Mongols don't win it, by definition, it must be a good playoffs because the fucking underdog just won. So actually, Mouz did some great work in that series. They actually even had to come back into it. I actually think that's an excellent. By the way, like Maui says, if anything, doesn't that play to some of the narrative of Mouz? They got a little bit underrated. If anything, people said all that stuff. I kept telling everyone this. Everyone was going, Mouz is going to choke on stage. Like, how are they going to get a chance to when Mongols is on the other side of the stage? You idiot! Like, they're even less experienced. Like, that's actually what the doctor ordered. If you're Mouz, like, you even got it. You started out doing badly and got a chance to wake up into the series. So that ended up being good. Basically, the only one I think was total crap was just Spirit versus TL. And if anything, it's one of the reasons I think actually no one really thought Spirit was going to win the major, because even against TL, they sort of it wasn't like they just dusted them completely. They still had moments in that where it was too close, and you thought, actually, is Spirit even good at this major? The other side of the bracket, which actually fulfilled the same storyline as the first major this year, which is it looks like you just put all your money that the winner comes out the other side, because it's like the stacked bracket of death. But yet again, FaZe wins it, only to lose the tournament. So, by the way, brilliant storyline for FaZe. I think everyone else is on the same train I was. Look, you all want to believe. Your heart says you want to believe in FaZe. But absolutely, your head had to say they were done already. Like, the problem is, for me, it's the Cologne one that killed them in everyone's heart. Because the real FaZe that did these runs here, beats Saw and just goes to the Vitality semis and gives them, they didn't know. The way they lost that Saw series was pathetic if you ever saw it. It looked like they gave up the ghost. So, actually, a lot of people thought that FaZe is gone. Whereas, obviously, they showed they were back. Then, if you consider, I actually think for G2, they were a perfect end to the year. All those plebs going, Nico shouldn't leave. You got to stay in this lineup. That's why he's leaving, guys. That's why, by the way, it's not. Think about what is inferred by the most recent news. The most recent news is Monte's probably staying, but after that, he's definitely going to leave when his contract runs out later next year. Here's the question you should all ask yourself: why is it there's nothing G2 can do that would make Monte want to stay? Spoiler: everyone loves to diss Falcons because they think no one wants to go there. I'm going to diss G2. Why did Nico and Monte basically why is their future plan, please let me be in any team except G2? What's wrong with G2? Am I missing something? It's one of the biggest orgs in the world. That should be a warning sign right there. So I think G2 was always fool's gold, because as you saw in this major and in each of these matches in the playoffs, anytime they hit like a motherfucker. The second they don't hit, holy shit, does that team fall apart. I actually think for real, in a way, it's probably more appropriate they went to the semis and had the crack at the final, but they could even have lost to Heroic. That was right there. And if you are, by the way, Heroic did what everyone hoped Mongols would do, which is you come in as there's an up-and-coming team, but the difference is they have the players that have played in playoffs. So they gave a really good account of themselves in that quarterfinal. On paper, they had one of the hardest draws, and they absolutely could have 2-0'd that series. They could have 2-1 that series. They gave a mega account of themselves. And I actually think if you track where they are as a team, aren't they just doing a gradual up arrow? If you do the Bitcoin zoom out, if you do the day by day, yeah, they have the ups and downs. If you do the big zoom out for the 3 months, it's going exactly as you'd want. They're actually going to be potentially, I always dreamed, the 7th best team in CS or something, because they've got the roles. Then if you just consider the other teams, how about Vitality? What a perfect ending to the shit show of Vitality, which we'll get to later in this episode. Because think about it. On paper, they should probably have won this major. They should have won, beaten FaZe, certainly. I would have had them beat G2. I'd have had them beat whoever they played in the final. But that is also what will be the defining memory of this Vitality lineup. They're the ultimate should-have team that just never did. They did it one time ever, and that was basically when Zemo had like a superlative end to a series. That's it. Otherwise, and by the way, people will forget that they could have lost that final to NAVI and Cologne too. So in many ways, this just it did sort of like crystallize a lot of the narratives into one event at the end of the year. And by the way, even the reason that Spirit run wasn't just Donk. Like if Donk had done all that, they would have lost still if there hadn't been other performances, crazy matches, which is also absolutely the story of this year's Spirit. Like that's why half the focus on Donk was too much focus. Like it wasn't even the case that he was ever the one losing you the bloody game. Like the guy might have had like 7 actual bad maps all year long. It's just he became so cracked. We started calling like, you know, a good map for Rops, a bad map for Donk, if you know what I mean. So that's just an interesting. But I agree. I actually think the playoffs, in the end, not only was like the bracket quite interesting, more than you'd think at the beginning. Right. Almost every match, basically, like I say, except for I think the TL Spirit one had some back and forth or some play. And I actually think you could not have asked for a better final. It's like I said, the only way it ever could have been better, but this is being greedy, is if they had have hit OT then, the roof would have come off that entire arena and like everyone would have lost their mind. So in some ways, whatever. It's by the way, it's actually probably better if you're actually a FaZe fan that they didn't win the major. I think if they win the major, then you've got the nightmare of like, bloody hell, should we do it again, guy? No, this was, by the way, I'm just going to say it right now. This was the last dance of that lineup. They had it. It was dope, but it's over. They didn't win. So cool. Let's all move on. So anyway, there we go.
Yeah. I just like how it wrapped all the storylines up again. Like, even though Mongols didn't make it past the quarterfinals, they still had a fantastic tournament, and they've continued up a trajectory. It just sucked that Senzu didn't show up, I think, was like the biggest thing that I hated about that quarterfinal. So I feel like if he did, they could have gave Mouz a run for their money. Liquid kind of ends the year as, again, a team that could always beat the teams ranked at or below their level, but can never break into the top 5 themselves. They were just kind of like a gatekeeper in many ways, kind of similar to FaZe. Just everything wrapped up the way that you kind of wanted to, but then you also got this miracle run out of FaZe that was shocking but really fun to follow. And really, again, the only dark marks was just like Navi wasn't even there, and then Vitality just petered out like way too quickly for anyone's liking. So other than that, though, I just think it was a good time for sure.
I think an underrated map that, if people want to look back at it because they might have missed it from the time zone, is G2 Heroic Map 3. Though I actually think that Mirage was probably the best map of the entire playoffs, other than the Grand Finals Map 3. Like, if you want to just say about building tension, like this Heroic team potentially overthrowing G2 in their first.
In some of these rounds, they're that close to winning, right? They're that close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think the clutch. Because the thing is that we got some pretty good moments in the grand finals, let's say, but like that Malbs 1v3 was against Heroic in that map 3. You know, that was probably my favorite clutch of the playoffs. Like that was just like, it didn't even make sense because it was pure mechanics actually, and bad positioning, bad crosshair placement. But that it was one of those just like, CS is beautiful for this exact reason that you can just hit every single headshot.
Yeah, I think that's what's cool about it is, like, you know, speaking of trajectories, like Heroic got the payoff as well in this one, even though they didn't win the game. And that's actually what's really cool about these playoffs setting up for the next year, too, is the fact that Mongols and Heroic are now teams to keep an eye on this next season. Like, now we're even more excited about those teams being teams that can compete potentially with top 5 opponents. So that's going to be a lot of fun to see how that kind of continues into the next year for sure.
All right, let's go to your point, Maui. Yeah,
I can take mine. Mine is just talking about the ridiculous and unbelievable year that Donk had. So, you know, I went back like looking at Simple's numbers from 2021 because I feel like I think that's the year that sort of set the standard as this is probably never going to be done again by anybody. And Donk actually beat him in a couple of categories, but there's some surprising ones where actually Simple got the better of Donk. And so KPR, so I'm using like LAN top 30 stats. I could, you know, you could filter it however way you want, but I feel like this is always like a good metric for you're playing reasonably skilled teams. You're filtering out all the BS, all the random like online games that just don't matter at all. I think when you start like studying elite performances like year to year, sure, using LAN top 20 might be a little bit better, but either way. So Simple beat him in KPR by a little bit. Donk won in ADR. Simple had more multi-kill rounds. But one thing that was like shocking to me is that Simple actually had more opening kills per round than Donk did this year, and he's dying like he has like 60% less opening deaths. So that's how ridiculous he was when he actually had his, you know, his unbelievable 2021. But I just wanted to say that the reason I picked this as good overall, instead of just comparing Donk to Simple, is just like, I am comparing it. Like, this is actually a year worthy of comparison with what we consider the best
in itself, right? Yeah.
Exactly. The fact that I have to pull up Simple's numbers and be like, wait, was this the best year ever? Okay, no, Simple probably beat him in a couple different categories. That's where that's what it merits. And for Donk as a whole, I feel like there's so many times when he could have crumbled this year. The first was at Katowice, win CS, change Peaker's advantage, like the kind of like the net code, which probably shouldn't have affected LAN as much, but it felt like it did hurt him a little bit in terms of rating immediately after that event. And then they again switched it out so that the player model, when you're strafing into an angle, doesn't wobble as much, kind of like the lean. Like I had a clip that was on the front page of Reddit for my stream where I kind of acted it out, where it's like the model used to like the beginning of this year and CS2 as a whole, for the first like 9 months of CS2, if you strafed into an angle and then you counter strafe, your body kind of like leaned into it and kind of tilted around. It's like you're doing a little bit of a wormy wave with your body, which made it harder to kill people as they were peeking into angles. It was like there were two things that were helping Peaker's advantage. One was the net code, and the second was the way that the models worked. And donk caught past both of them and still had an incredible year. It's like they almost Kenny S nerfed him twice in a way, and he still came out with the best year. You could say, like, you could argue for m0NESY being better. I'm taking donk pretty firmly. Like donk's my player of the year, and that's despite two big nerfs to him. Well, they're trying to, by the way, improve the op. They were trying to improve the op at some points this year, and so m0NESY's like catching him, but donk's actually getting actively nerfed by Counter-Strike and Valve updates, and yet he's still holding his own as the best player. So despite all of that, despite being the most steady demo, like people still, I think, underrate that fact too, that donk, there's no real like metric for this necessarily, because who knows when people download a demo what they're going to do. But if you had to ask me, like, in terms of POV demos studied this year, donk POVs were studied by far more than anybody else, because not everybody's an opper. Sure, you'll watch m0NESY in a game, but like more people are riflers, and so more people are going to look at what is it that donk is doing in order to be this incredible as a player. So most studied, nerfed twice, and still comes out with this kind of year. And he's 17. Like, it's just so unbelievable. Like, we can talk about rookie stuff a little bit later, but like overall, it's just like just the way that he was able to accomplish this, and with the cherry on top. I don't even say it's the cherry. It's like he provided all of that, which was a feast in its own. It's like he delivered a whole second feast for everybody, which is winning the major, being the MVP of it. Like, even ZywOo didn't do that. Even
30 bombed the last map of the major, for fuck's sake. He 30 bombed it.
Yes, exactly.
In MR12,
by the way. In MR12, he 30 bombed it in regulation. Like, how unbelievable. Over 100 ADR in the grand finals, like, in a tight series, That's just so ridiculous. Like, there's so many things you could... Okay, I want to let it to you guys now.
I mean, it's one of those things where you could toss a lot of flowers at donk just based on, like, what he accomplished this year individually as a player, what he helped Spirit accomplish as a team. You obviously just look, it is just stats porn, like how good he is when it comes to like rating, damage per round, kills per round. Opening success, all that jazz. It is ridiculous. And the fact that this was essentially his full, like, first year at tier 1, like, he played on the Spirit main team last year, but only a couple of lands and online events. Like, this was really his first time, like, playing majors, playing against the top opposition on an in-and-out basis at 16 years old for some of the years, 17 now as we end the year. And just what he was able to accomplish is incredible in a role that is often inconsistent, right? Like, we talk about, the entry fragging role being so flaky just because, like, what you have to do kind of puts you in situations that kind of defies the ability to be consistent, and he was able to overcome that anyway and still be just one of the most ridiculous stars in the game. And one of the biggest things that I kind of wanted to hit, like, just real quick to kind of add to the stats that you don't see necessarily on the surface, is that most entry fraggers are kind of taking like maybe that 25-ish% like opening attempts on the T side. But then you have your crazy ones that just go for like 30% or more. So that would be like donk, Xantares, Malbs, Elige. Like, there's just like a handful of players who do that. But the thing is donk was having a success rate that was so incredibly high, like was so much higher than anyone else. The only other person who was even close to him was ZywOo, but ZywOo was taking like 10% less opening duels on the T side, and he's an opper, right? So like the fact that donk was able to take like these massive amounts of opening duels on the T side and come out like 54% success rate, that means he's giving his team a 5 versus 4 like more than half the time. Like, it just sets the table for the rest of your round when he's able to do that. And then you even saw, like, throughout certain points of the major, like, his role kind of evolved, and they even kind of put him in more like aggro lurk or trade positions to try to get more efficiency out of him, and he even thrived in that role too. So it's like, this is a guy that just can do so much, and he's only just getting started, right? And there's no telling how much better he'll get, how much more he'll evolve as a player and how much more of a complete player he'll become over time as he like learns new things, plays against different opposition, works with other people. Like, this is just the beginning for him, is the crazy part. And we just haven't really had someone in a rifling role really shine this bright. Like, yeah, Nico is an incredibly versatile rifler. I'm always going to give him his flowers because of how great he's been throughout the years. Prime Shocks is another, like, just an insanely versatile rifler who could really kind of light the stats up. The fact that donk's doing it from an entry rifler role is just absurd. Like, it just doesn't make any sense that he's able to do this.
By the way, on that latter point about the absurd, essentially, like, usage of this player as an entry force / the first point of contact in a game, the part that is so insane about that is that what people are going to miss there, Dust, is what you're saying is it's not even his success rate. It's the success rate matched with the sample size is what's impossible.
Exactly.
Essentially, no one else could probably do that. Even the aforementioned people, I already think basically outside of Donk, I think Xantara's bricks, so yes, like, I don't even know actually how good Eternal Fire is. I just know this guy does everything on T-side. Same thing everyone knows in complexity. Elise just is the reason why a round starts and they get a kill, etc. Like, these teams get hard carried. But I'll give the comparison that maybe Maui might know from the NBA. What actually made people realize that Steph Curry wouldn't just be like a good player, but might be like one of the best players ever, was when people started to track his stats. People before used to just think of the 3-point shot as a shot that you use from ball movement. You have to be open, and ideally you want to not be guarded. But what they realized was, if you ever looked at the stats of Steph Curry, he used to be hitting, unironically, something mental like upper 40% accuracy when completely guarded. As in, when he dribbled into like being just guarded in front of him, he was hitting the same rate that the player hit in the dream scenario where you just pass the ball 3 times and they're totally open. Well, that essentially shows that player, nobody can do that. Nobody can do what he is doing then. And that's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why they allowed players who were good at 3-point shooting to scale up their usage, because the premise went, well, wait a minute, if he could really do that even like 3% more and keeps hitting at that percent, like, that's essentially like the best shot in basketball at that point in time. So that's what it's become with Donk. Like, I actually think there's a quick scenario I'm going to explain to you here, which is I actually think Donk, like Steph Curry, is going to ruin a generation of aggressive riflers, because people are going to think either they can be Donk, or even worse, this is worse, is when the team thinks you can be Donk, because you can't. Even all those people I just mentioned, they're already pushing the limits. I already thought it was impossible to Xantara's numbers when I first saw them. Like, no one could do that. Like, what the fuck? Maybe it's because he doesn't play, all the top tournaments always, or they don't get out the group stage. I was thinking, so what Donk does it against literally everyone, including in like majors, etc. It doesn't make sense. So if people don't know, like, that in itself, like, that will be fool's gold. People will chase after, because there's only one Donk, which is what we're getting at. And also, if you want a real highlight of how insane his rookie year was, it's exactly what Maui just said. Notice it's not that people just compared his rookie year to the GOAT Simple. They had to go to Simple's 2 best years, 2018 and 2021, to find comparable years where you can even find someone else where the stats can beat him. Like Maui said, you have to tunnel in and find an angle where the stat beats him. And the reason that's mental is I've actually always given it up to Ziwu. You can't really argue. Ziwu did have the best rookie year. It's just that even he's human and would have a bad game of the majors. You know what I mean? Like, he just was smurfing the rest of the year. It was really awesome. And even his year doesn't come close to this guy's. It just doesn't. Like, the gaps in, because that's the thing all year long, Maui, that seems like it's broken people's brains. You can tell that people do look at the number first before they think about how you get the number, because I keep telling people, if the numbers between Donk and Ziwu are equal, then Donk wins, because what Donk is doing is like harder to do, and the difference is Ziwu couldn't do that. Like, you could put Ziwu into a team that speaks English or French in exactly the same role as Donk, he wouldn't be able to do this, which isn't a diss to Ziwu. That's the point. It's a compliment to Donk that we've never seen a player like this. That's why I keep saying that the real reason I have to keep saying he might be the GOAT, or he's going to be the GOAT, is because I almost feel like he's even changing how we define what the best player is like. Because before we did do things like, the reason why we all loved the AWPer is because the AWPer can control the game. You have very low deaths, you have very high kills, you play around him, you set him up in the right way, you give him the space, he decides when he takes the shots, all the classic things. But none of those apply to Donk. In fact, the way Donk plays CS is actually more like the people like fucking Tessus or Exertion situation where it's more like, hey, listen, we can't get into the site, so you just run through a brick wall. Oh, you did, fuck, you got a 2K. Cool, we're in the site. Like, that's not even strategy. Like, no one could do that if you haven't got donk. Like, I hope people out there realize, I agree with you. I think this player was clearly, in the same ways if you ever follow like the NFL, all the edge rushers that break the game, the whole offense just prepares for them all week if you don't know. A million things you do is who's going to block him, who's going to be the double team help, what do you do when you're in trouble? Like, I can tell, if you go and watch that Mouz against Spirit semi-final where donk has the bad nuke game, go watch it again. Donk doesn't just whiff a bunch of kills. They clearly, no joke, had a bunch of setups on nuke to get two people to be fighting him and doing double peeks on him and having like nades that go onto him and stuff that just made his game harder, right? No one's doing that for other riflers. Like, listen, if you play nuke and you're against Nico, you're aware he's going to be outside. You're going to do some things there where someone looks at. You're not making your whole T-side about get this guy isolated in a 2v1 or like you're AWPer against him long range or something like this guy. He has changed CS. And it just shows to me like, yeah, it's crazy. Like at this point in time, he also has that quality. If you know the star players in most American sports, people do that thing where you try and first of all shut them down, then eventually you learn you can't. So what you do is you just shut their teammates down. That's how you win the game. Like people already clearly are going to do that in Spirit as well. Like if anything, by the way, you should probably focus on like Zontix and fucking Shiro. If you shut them down, you probably win no matter what donk does because one man can't beat five. So no, I think it's insane. I'll also say this as well. It's not just like the entry shit that's impossible. If you go watch that game against FaZe, there's one round they do when they're on CT side and Spirit's actually leading in the game where they just do a retake where it looks like any normal team would just save. You just like wait, see if I can get like an exit. If I get a really early kill, we'll say go. They clearly, no joke, if you watch this round, are just going to do the retake the whole time and donk just like walks in and kills like 3 people or something like it. And that's the other thing I don't get. Beyond the odd map, like maybe in Cologne or something, even in the final, he never ever looked visibly nervous. Like as in the game, he never did like the weird move or the whiff. Like I said, somehow his game just stayed. Like if you'd have asked someone for real, nameplates off, who is the fucking mega veteran in this game and who is the rookie, and I'm comparing like Frozen and donk, you'd think Frozen was the fucking rookie, mate. He's the guy who was like a bit diminished or couldn't get in the game because donk just kept rolling from minute 1 to the end of the final. Like he was in an FPL game. Like I've never seen anything like it. That's the other thing. It's why in a way, the ultimate image that will always be burned into my mind isn't like the way they won the final. It isn't them cheering or Shiro crying. It's actually just that ridiculous swag walk where this 17-year-old Russian kid is like, right, I've completed level 1 of CS. Where do I go now? It's like, bro, you've already hit the top. Like that's supposed to be everything. What? Like, like he actually didn't even understand how insane it was. And also, by the way, is this guy actually some sort of religious fucking figure? He arrives on Earth, first year, best player ever, wins the major. He's so fucking magnanimous a human, Maui. He doesn't even celebrate himself as a 17-year-old. I'd be pretty selfish. He's like, no, I must go and give kindness to the FaZe players and let them. You played very well. Listen, you were playing against donk. No one can beat donk. Trust me, I am donk. Like, what even is that? That's like some Jesus shit, mate. This guy's unbelievable, isn't he? It's mental. It's actually insane. Yeah. It's insane.
If you want to blow your mind, just watch POVs of like the opponent that shoots, and like what they actually get to see before they're dead. Like it's it's like unplayable. Like, and he's doing this to like the best players in the world. They see him on their screen for like 0.5 seconds and they're gone. And they're some of the best players in the world. Like that was like one of the craziest things for me is just watching it from that perspective. Like it's just insane. And I think again, like what it comes down to is this: is like we've all already obviously poured on the fact that he has incredible stats, that he does it from one of the roles that it's so hard to do from, and that he's doing it in his first year, and that he still has so much more room to grow. But I think the biggest thing for me that Maui already kind of indicated is he almost seems nerf proof. Like even things that we would think would make him worse didn't. Like he still persisted through it. He only had one bad event the entire year. That was Cologne. So like this makes me feel like what is going to stop this guy? Like what could actually make it to where he doesn't have a similar year next year? And I just don't know what the answer is for it. Like I just feel like he's kind of covered everything as far as like, yeah, I can just keep doing this for a long time.
I mean, the things that'll nerf donk will be people that can play as well as donk. Like, if everybody else scales up their game to being able to do that, or if he just plays less. Like, it would have to be a motivation thing. I think a couple points that I want to say after, like, hearing all of that. One is that, again, like, reminder, this is a great year, but, like, in 2021, again, like, I have to hammer this point because it was so crazy to me when I was looking all of this stuff up, is that Simple did have more kills per round as openers in 2021 than Donk did. Like, that's how crazy that year was for him. Like, and he was doing it on so many less attempts, but overall still more. The second thing is that on kind of like the theory of say, like, you know, money balling this or refinement culturing this of what Donk is doing here. Like, I don't know if you can really scale this up in like the same way, because, like, you know, the analogy between like shooting a 3-pointer and like everybody can just shoot more 3-pointers. It's just that you need people that can win these fights like Donk. But like with basketball, you know, you're just shooting a stationary target, and it's kind of like what determines if you're going to hit that or not is if people are going to guard you well enough. But like, if people are starting to level up their game as entry fraggers, and you're just sending your entry fraggers at one another, I feel like teams are going to say, wait a second, everybody's entry fraggers are getting to a higher level, and you can't necessarily just have them run at each other and saying who has the best day, or else there is going to be no consistency. Like, eventually someone's going to have to crack the code of this entry fragger rifler meta and say, like, wait a second, we need to like set up players with better utility again or something like that. So, but I think that where it's concerning is like the Donk's year is so incredible, it kind of makes you underrate everybody that's around him. Like that's where I was going to go with it a little bit. It's just like, I think it's really easy to overrate Chopper as an in-game leader, but it's just that this dude, like, Chopper now has the best tool in anybody's shed. Like, he had, like, there's no single person that you would rather have to build your team as an in-game leader. Like, okay, would you want to have a god tier opper? Would you want to have a really great late round clutch kind of anchor player? Or would you just want to have an entry fragger that you can send through a brick wall every single round and he's going to find you something? And I think if I'm an IGL, I would say let's build out the rest of the team later. If I get that singular god tier entry fragger, well, now I have a 5v4 on 60% of the rounds, 70% of the rounds, and then I can work from that man advantage already. So also that, like, but like, with how unreal it is, that round you were talking about, Thorin, about like the retake that they did, was round 8 on dusT 2, where FaZe was just locked into the bomb site. Like, that kind of round is where I did tweet that I've just never seen anything like this before, because, you know, I've seen Simple in that situation before. I've seen ZywOo in that situation. I've seen m0NESY. I've seen some of the best players of all time be in that situation before. What they do is they try to wait for a mistake. Like, Simple's going to post up at the door with the op. He's going to scope, see, does anybody peek him? Like, he's going to hit the shot, and then that could crack open the door. But the thing is that FaZe didn't make a mistake there. Like, FaZe didn't actually make a mistake. He just rifled better than everybody that he faced. He even the last guy, who I think it might have been Frozen, was at window, and he was kind of like, shit, where do I move? You know, I'm stuck at window right now. Donk's jiggling me from the tunnel. I know the other Spirit player is outside, so if I push window, I'm gonna die. If I stay on this, it just felt like the most helpless situation. And everybody else before him, they just got peeked. Like, they all just got peeked and died. Like, that's why this is just so unprecedented, because like, again, like, I feel like if you go numbers to numbers, oppers should come out on top, because they play this certain style that's going to favor their gun more often than not. They're not trying to usually force the issue by breaking into a situation, because, like, you know, the ops move speed is slow enough that if you peek into an angle with it, you're probably just not going to win that fight, because a good rifler on land is just going to nail you as soon as you're rounding that corner. But Donk is using a rifle. His move speed is still fast enough that they're going to miss their first bullet and he doesn't miss his first bullet. Or if they do, like, then he just donk slides away from the fight. And, like, on top of the whole unbelievable year with all the stats, all the accomplishments, like, even just simply his mechanics, he's getting people to copy him. That whole, like, donk slide thing that I coined as a term, like, everybody's trying to create, they're like trying to mimic the donk slide. Like, some players have done better than others at being as good at it or countering it. Like, Nico's one of the few people that seems to have found, like, a counter in a way. I think Stico made a great video about that one, but, like, most players now are just kind of throwing out donk slides, but it's clearly not as natural to them. They're, like, trying to take a fight. They're trying to, like their instinct is to peek the angle with good crosshair placement, nail the guy faster than he nails you. But Donks is, like, intentionally swinging out a little wider than he should, so that in the fight he can donk slide back. So it's not even, it's that he's actually created almost like a new mechanic that people have to use and respect. Whereas, like, other people, like, in the past, like, ZywOo just did everything to perfection. It's not like, to me, he created anything. Like, there was no level of creativity to ZywOo's gameplay. It was just polishing and perfecting everything that came before him. Like, Donk actually made something that really wasn't used to this extent by anybody in the past.
I'm just going to say as well.
Keep going. No, I was just saying, think the fact that we have a move named after a player in the game. We've never fucking done that before. When else have we ever sat down in CS:GO or CS2 and had a player that was so good that was doing something so insane that we had to sit down and say this is the Ziwu move or this is the whatever. The fact that we actually have to name something after this guy in itself should tell you enough about how incredible that he is.
I also think on Maui's point about entry fraggers and entry players, you will just never see a player like this, because I also think, in my opinion, Counter-Strike actually has a very intuitive way that people find their roles. That is the same as sports, which is it comes from when you're a child and you play the PV version of the sport. So I'll give you the European version since you guys are American. The way the sport, soccer, football works is every kid wants to be a striker and score. So what you do is you all try to do that, but very quickly you learn either I'm not good at, I don't have the coordination to score, I don't have the speed, for example, to beat people. And gradually what happens is, first of all, on your team, someone's better than you, so you let him score. Over time, you find your role, and the joke is the goalkeeper's the worst player to start out with, but then at the pro level, it's someone who's just got that mentality, and they know it's just about being a goalkeeper, right? And in the same ways in basketball, it's just your physical frame defines which position you play and where it makes sense to match up, etc. Because it's a game about height. In the same way, I think in Counter-Strike, if you look at nearly all the good entry players, they tend to be people who have streaky aim, because that's exactly the person you would throw away on a pure entry. Either they Tessus run around the corner and insta headshot him, or they miss, and then we don't give a shit what their spray's like because they're dead anyway because they missed. So that player, it is perfect that he is streaky like that. That's why actually, typically, you wouldn't actually have someone at Elysian, a top team, go early and as often as he did. You'd have him come second behind the guy. Therefore, he uses his consistent aim to clean up. Donk does both at the same time. Normally, I think, because the thing about Donk's game is he has good headshot ability, but the thing I always say is it's the flaw on his accuracy is impossible. This guy actually has the thing simple. When Simple and Nico just choose to aim on your head and it looks like it's just up to them if they want a headshot. You're what the fuck? They're not even taking a shot I missed. They just put it onto your head and shoot you. He does that with his aim, but he just never misses on the spray somehow. So the flaw of his accuracy is impossible. I feel like that player left to their own devices normally never ends up as an entry. That would be a lurky player or middle of the pack or something. That's where you'd put that sort of skills. I also think he's just the most unique skill set I've ever seen. Exertion's style of aiming isn't like that. He's way more up and down. All of them are who play that sort of role. So I think that's why he's another unicorn. I don't think you'll ever get a player who wants to be that player, but also has this skill set. It's fucking crazy. So I don't think anyone can be Donk. Like I just said, I don't think it's an option. By the way, my good point ties into all that we've just talked about, because in a moment we just talked about the Major and Spirit, which is, I have to do this, because I can't believe this is where the only downside of the Donk storyline is, because he had one of the greatest Majors ever, an amazing final, and he is the MVP, blah, blah, blah. It actually overshadowed that magixx put together, I'm not even joking, a top 5 performance ever in a major final. Someone even ran the numbers. The only people who've ever done a plus 30 in a major final was fucking Snacks, I'm going to guess, in that Katowice. And then I think it was bloody, I can't remember if it was some other Giga player who done it. If it wasn't Olaf Meister, it was some fucking player on that, Get Right or something like that. It was again, first ballot Hall of Fame player. magixx isn't even vaguely one of the stars of this team. And normally when you watch him play, by the way, if you think of map 1 when he was on Nuke, normally he plays with his brain. He actually plays more like an Interza Perfecto type. I outmaneuver you, I play for time, I do something clever to just bait you into a shot. He was doing that, and he was just hitting the first bullet with the AK all fucking series long. And he even kept it going on map 3. People will forget that rotation out of long A on CT side on dusT 2 to the top mid. That probably won them the fucking game right there. That round alone, phases in the match, everything's going their way, the swing of the momentum, everything. This guy, his impact was fucking actually out of this world. I've never seen a role player play essentially like a star player like that. The numbers were impossible. That really was. Unlike, there's the difference. Donk could do it again. That was the match of your life. You're just grateful to ever have one of those. You're never going to get another, by the way. The idea you get that in a major finals is insane. It's just impossible.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had a life series in the grand finals. There's no doubt about it. And what was kind of crazy was, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, is that he actually did uptake the amount of times that he was willing to go for the opening, do on the T side.
For sure.
And at first, they were kind of doing it almost in a like, let's just find a way to use this guy because he's playing so bad. So, like, for example, like on Ancient, they were just trebucheting him in first on B Rant to let Donk be a trade fragger instead of the pure entry. And it was simply because Magix wasn't performing that well. So we're like, well, fuck it. We'll at least throw him out there first and make it to where Donk doesn't have to. And then we'll just kind of use him as like a sacrificial entry fragger. And that was a trend that we had saw both Chopper and Magix do throughout the course of the major. But then all of a sudden, you get to the playoffs. I want to give props to Magix. It wasn't just the grand final. He also played a fantastic semifinal as well. Like, he actually did.
By the way, he was so good in the playoffs, dusT. He went from like all right number to, I think by the end of the tournament, he's like a top 10 rated player in the whole tournament. He was something like fucking fifth or something at the end. That's how crazy his semis and final was. It was really nuts.
Yeah, it was one of the, and so the thing was, it's like, what was funny about it was it turned from we're throwing this guy in first because he's playing so poorly that we're just going to sack him for Donk to have a better opportunity to, oh shit, this guy's just killing everybody when we throw him in first. Like, it was actually absurd. And I just don't think that I've ever seen such a crazy glow up in such a big moment in Counter-Strike. Like, to go from being like, again, because like, let's talk about it. When we talk about Spirit, we always knew that Donk was a star. Shiro was always a sidekick. And if you could just get Zontix to be like 80-90%, like, that's when Spirit could be their most dangerous. No one was ever talking about Magixx as being like part of the supporting cast at all. He was just a role player. So the fact that he leapfrogged Zontix by a substantial margin, went out there, put up numbers like that, and he did it in a major semi and grand final of all places to choose when to do it. Again, a live series, basically. Like, it was just absurd, because when we were watching the games, it was like, I think I was like, we were like live tweeting about it in the green, like, the dude just couldn't miss. Like, the dude just couldn't lose a duel. Like, he could do no wrong. Like, it was absurd. And it's like, man, like, if there was any way to like bottle that up and like be able to have that for the future, that'd be great. Obviously, we don't expect it, but it was almost like you take like the FaZe Miracle Run story and you just put that for one guy, and that's what basically what Magixx did there in the playoffs of the major. It was absurd. It was absurd.
Yes.
So I looked at Nero's sheet. Nero keeps up to date like this arena rating. So it's like 50-ish people this year that have had 2 or more series in arena events. There's only 10 of them based off of the average rating that they have throughout the year that actually get better in arenas. And magixx is actually one of those players. Like, the only 2 players on Spirit, or the only player I think on Spirit that actually gets better in an arena situation is Spirit. Like, nobody else. Like, yeah. So, I mean, like, Donk still stays really strong. Zontix doesn't really lose too much. The worst arena performer per their usual numbers is unsurprisingly Shiro for Spirit. The worst overall player, if people are actually interested, is Tessus, which is why Yenko really kind of hammers like Pimp when he says this is the best Danish player. It's like, well, in arenas he's the worst version of himself. So for magixx to do that, you know, I on Hot Take Point, man, I did still say like they should cut him. I don't know if magixx is somebody that he's gonna have like a reign status around him, but he has been on Spirit now for 5 years, and we have seen him in multiple situations have these kinds of performances now. Obviously, what we saw here in Shanghai, but also what we saw in Antwerp versus FaZe in that dusT 2 game, especially, where that was probably the most interesting series, or at least map in that whole major. So yeah, I don't know. There's just something in certain people that just seems to elevate their game or not shake them when they hit these kind of big moments. And by the way, it's not like magixx's rating goes up a lot in arena stuff. It's like 0.01. Like it's just that he's one of the few people that doesn't go down. So if anything, I think Olaf Meister had the quote like, what was it, like 7 years ago? He said something like, you know, it's not that I get better in arenas, it's that everybody else gets worse. And I think that's kind of how I might have to view magixx. Like, he just is not shaken by those kinds of things. And I don't know, like, magixx kind of has this weird aura around him. I'm not, like, trying to say that in the Zoomer way of, you know, he's got some kind of, like, presence or anything like that. But he does have a kind of an interesting way of presenting himself where he doesn't say a lot. It kind of reminds me of what Get Right and the NIP guys did in 2012 and 13 when they were taking interviews, and they would always, as a gag, just say like nothing. They would just basically be like, yes, no. You know, they would always do that stuff. And I don't know if there's any secret behind it, but the demeanor on everybody on Spirit does seem to be a little bit more like cool, like they're trying to be cool, and it wasn't really fitting of their results this year until they won this major. And then it's almost like the means are now justified by the end, which is that they won this whole event And so I guess you're allowed to be cool. You're allowed to be very brief in any of your answers when you're able to put up performances like this.
By the way, he is also a player, though, where that major performance, I don't care what anyone says, that doesn't mean he can't be cut from this team or can't be replaced. Like, this is a player, by the way, who actually benefits from the way the rating calculates. Like, his rating numbers look okay. By the way, his KPR is fucking appalling. Like, he's actually for real. I've seen him have, like, below 0.6 KPR in tournaments. Like, that's about as low as you can ever get, by the way, and still, like, be allowed to prefer professional CS. Like, normally we only let the IGL do that, by the way, guys. So that suggests to me, if the rating is still making him okay, that actually he is doing great things like play for time, survive at the right thing, you know, do assists and shit like that, all the extra things that add into the thing, because obviously he's getting fuck all kills, is what I'm saying by that number. So I do think that angle's too much overrated. Like, look, he just had an awesome performance here. My point here is you can't just ignore his performance. It was, one of the all-timers. Yeah, it was actually unbelievable. Right. Now, here's an interesting detail for you, which is that obviously I'm going to do an ad now, which is if you go online without ExpressVPN, it's like leaving your kids with the nearest stranger while you go to the restroom. They're probably not a kidnapper or serial killer. This is really the copy, by the way. That's why I'm just reading it. You are going to think I wrote this, didn't you? That you're thinking, are you real? No, they wrote this. So they're probably not a kidnapper or a serial killer. But why would you ever take that risk? Indeed. So obviously, they're talking about relative to your data, aren't they? You don't want your data to be taken by other people. So every time you connect to anything on the internet, by the way, it obviously does like access your IP, and then there's a flow of data, and then your ISP sees it and all that jazz. By the way, if someone gets in the middle, they obviously see it all too. So if you don't know, there's a reason why companies on the internet sell your data and want to know where you're going and track what sites you're on. And there's a reason why governments want to do these things. So ExpressVPN, apparently it would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past their encryption. It's really easy to use. You just have like one button, by the way, when you turn it on, once you have like the region set. It's one of the most easy ones to turn on and off of any VPN I've ever seen. It works on pretty much every device you can imagine, phones, laptops, tablets. So wherever you go, by the way, so that means you can also put it on your phone. So if you're someone who travels like we do, for example, you go through an airport, you turn it on there. Again, just one button. Very easily does it all. It has mega high ratings if you go and check all the different tech sites, CNET, The Verge, etc. I've used it myself many times. If you don't know, MonteCristo, who obviously is from the League of Legends side, used to work with Flashpoint. He uses it all the time, actually, because he currently goes and lives in Korea. And in Korea, they even have a weird thing on Twitch where Koreans can't have the Twitch save their VODs. So you have to like VPN to another country, and then it'll like save the VODs as if you were in another country. I always say the classic one is, even though people will mention you have all these different content libraries, Netflix and all that around the world, and obviously they tailor what their content is. I think once he said something like Netflix has like 18,000 titles, but for example in the US it was only like 6,000 were available, because obviously they tailor them based on the region. So it means there are movies and shows you just can't see even though you actually pay for Netflix. So what I always say is this: technically you don't have to be in the country that Netflix is showing that thing in. Your internet connection just has to be from that country. So actually, in theory, there's absolutely nothing even morally wrong about using a VPN in that sense. They're not actually checking where you were from anywhere. They just look at where your IP is from. And also, as mentioned before, even your ISP, in theory, won't be able to see what things you are doing and won't be able to log it all, etc. So secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com. It's on the screen, /Snake Banter, all one word. That's vpn.com/Snake Banter, all one word, and you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/Snake Banter. Thank you to ExpressVPN and anyone who uses that as their VPN of choice. Right, we will now go, because that was a good choice in terms of products, to a bad choice, which is dusT. What is the bad point we are bringing to the table today?
So my bad point is that Vitality only won a single tournament in 2024 and crashed in the major quarterfinals despite being one of the best teams in the world of 2024 in many people's eyes. Now, preface this, I know y'all talked about this in Hot Take Point May, but I actually didn't watch it because I wanted to make sure I didn't cross-contaminate, but we'll see where we line up at. But essentially, look at this. Like, if you look at their peers, NAVI won 4 tournaments, including a major. Spirit won 4 tournaments, including a major, and Katowice. G2 won 2 tournaments, despite only playing with this current 5 since July. Plus, they won Dallas with the stand-in.
Yeah, true.
So technically 3 titles there. Then Mouz had 2 titles as well, if you're kind of comparing them to their peers. Now, this then puts Vitality at the end of the year in company with FaZe, who had 1 win at Chengdu. And remember, the fall-off that FaZe had, obviously, aside from this miracle run over at Shanghai. So this is just tough for me because Vitality was a consistent top 5 team in the world for 2024. In my opinion, you could argue that they were either the most consistent team for the year, or at worst second behind NAVI, because NAVI had that like run of 6 finals in a row, and obviously were really mega after the Copenhagen Major. Whereas, you know, you look at a team like Vitality, outside of bombing Katowice at the beginning of the year, they pretty much placed top 5 or better at every single event for the entire rest of the year. Like, the only real ones that they fell off at were EWC, which I'm not really going to count because the format was bullshit. And then they had, I think the top 8 at EPL season 20. But outside of that, they were consistently placing top 5 or better, most often placing top 4. They obviously had a bunch of finals appearances, like at EPL season 19, Dallas, you know, again, like just one of these things. And yes, they did win Cologne, the most prestigious event outside of a major. But the fact that they didn't get any other trophies is kind of absurd to me, considering the fact that ZywOo was a top 3 player in the world. It's an op hybrid who had insane entry success on the T side with the rifle. So you pretty much had a Swiss Army knife at ZywOo, who was one of the best operators in the world, but simultaneously could be an entry fragger for you on T side with an AK. Then you have Flames, who is one of the better entry fraggers in the world. Yeah, there are people you're going to rank above him, but he's still pretty mega for his role. Spink's fantastic for his role. And so when you put him in the trio with ZywOo and Flames, you have an incredible amount of firepower, is kind of just what I'm getting at. Then Mezzi's no slouch. He had a great second half of the year as just like a role player. Like, he certainly put in his time. Then you have Apex, who, you know, is a veteran IGL. I thought this team was one of the better tactical teams in Counter-Strike, next to, you know, Mouse Sports and NAVI for my money for the year. And they also had an incredible fucking map pool. Like, yes, they didn't play Ancient towards the end of the year. And yes, their Anubis started strong, but then kind of weakened towards the end of the year. But they were mega on dusT, Mirage, Nuke, and Vertigo. So they had 4 maps where they were like just ridiculous at by the time the year was over with. And they were still pretty solid on some other maps. So the fact that they had all this going for them that I've run through, you know, player talent, map pool, tactically sound, super consistent and always kind of placing in or near the top 5, you know, winning Cologne, a really prestigious trophy. The fact that they had all that going for them, and they're going to end their year with one single trophy in the cabinet, to me is pretty freaking absurd. So that's going to be my bad point, that they just did not get as much as they should have out of this roster, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, here's why. I got to do the little self-glazed tour before I start this one, okay? This is why I'm different than other analysts, because a lot of analysts are just going to give you the numbers. I'm going to give you the numbers, and I'm going to give you the why, okay? Of the 3 revelation superstar players this year, donk, m0NESY, ZywOo has the biggest drop-off in arena performances. And the reason for that, because most people would just say that's it, that's the number, he drops 0.1 in rating when he's in arena events. The reason is that when I watch ZywOo play, watch a POV of ZywOo, he's the best in the world at punishing for mistakes, but he's not, by any stretch of the imagination, the best at creating opportunities. What I mean by that is that ZywOo is going to read the rotations of opponents incredibly well. He's going to punch them because they don't throw that key piece of utility, and he's always going to hit that simple 7 out of 10 difficulty shot because he's put himself in the place to succeed. But then when he has to actually create a moment for himself, try to, you know, bust into a round, that's really not his forte. He's not really good at, in a 3v4, 3v5, doing anything other than just like playing to punish through every other stage of the round. And so he's going to just end up saving. And so when you actually look at it, the arena numbers for all of the other players on his team, between mezii and Flames, they actually get better in arenas. When you look at Apex, he goes down, but it's by 0.005. Like, it's like less than 0.01 rating he goes down. Spinks goes down a little bit. ZywOo goes down the most by far. And again, it's just because, like, in these kinds of moments, when you're playing elite teams in the world, they don't make those kinds of mistakes. They throw that key piece of utility. They have better trading procedures. They're on top of each other. They're going to also shoot you back if you miss. So for ZywOo, I think that he needs to level up his game once again and become that player a bit more like what Simple was when we contrasted the two, where ZywOo would always make the bright play, and then Simple would create a play we didn't even know was possible. Like, the lack of creativity in how ZywOo plays is why I had that whole take about him having no cultural impact. It's like, yes, we remember a great ZywOo clutch, but we also have seen so many times where he's just kind of irrelevant in a really important series, where he's just like, you know, he's still good, he's still the best player on Vitality, but he doesn't do enough to actually have Vitality. Like, he doesn't create a system around himself. Like, it's like Simple was the system for NAVI. m0NESY can in rounds become the system for G2. Donk is flat out the system for G2. There's no, I mean for Spirit, there's no question about that. But ZywOo is just kind of like, Like, again, it's what Apex said about him years ago. He's like, he's a great soldier, but he's not that leader. He's not that guy that's going to actually, have that artistic stroke of what to do in the round to break it wide open. He's just going to try to follow his flow chart of what he thinks is the best possible play, instead of saying, okay, let me go out on a limb. And when he does try to go out on a limb and he tries to play above himself in arena games, that's just not what he does. You have to also, you practice the way that you're going to play in these big moments, but it's just that the way that ZywOo has practiced for his whole life is just be an insurance policy, just making sure that he cleans up the mistakes of opponents. But it's not like ZywOo doesn't make meta changing movements, or he doesn't make a play that's like, oh, that we call that the ZywOo play. He just plays really strong angles and he rotates very quickly. So he needs to be more proactive in these kinds of moments, because I don't think any of his teammates are bad. I mean, even by what I just cited in terms of arena numbers, in fact, they all do well, sometimes even better than they do in studio environments, because they pick up the slack for him. But he's the biggest drop off of a superstar in big moments. Like in arena games, he just has the biggest drop off, and it's just that he doesn't create. He just cleans up.
The reason why I've always found it so frustrating to sort of battle this notion that like any criticism ZywOo is hating, or like he is, because remember, the worst thing is they're not talking about is he really good. It's always, is he the GOAT? Like, as in, is he the best player to ever play Counter-Strike? So you're obviously if you're not, by the way, the GOAT, and even if you are, there's still holes where you're picking your game. There's still things you're not as good at. One of the areas where ZywOo has thus far actually not even compared, forget just simple, he doesn't even compare to Nico, Shocks. He's actually, funnily enough, more in the vein of a Kenny S. If you don't know, Kenny S also was a guy who wasn't like, Kenny S had no tactical input in the game. He just went and hit AWP shots. And if you put him in the right position like a turret, he hits the AWP shots. And if you leave him on around, he can win a clutch, he can do that. But he's not the guy who's ever making like a secondary call or like, hey, I've spotted something, let me set this up and I'm going to see what I can do and then I'll trigger what we're going to do next. All the players I just mentioned were stars, but eventually half the reason they even try being IGLs is their game sense for their position becomes so high level. At their position, they're basically the IGL of what they're going to do. Like, as in, what I think Nico's proven with his choice of who he likes as IGL and who he doesn't, is he doesn't want Karrigan and Alexi B's input into what he's going to do. He's going to pick what he's going to do because he knows better than you, because he's Nico. Now, the problem with that is ZywOo, that's the last chapter to his story that hasn't been written. He just remains the guy, because I agree with you, I've always said, he lets the game come to him. But the problem with that is, you are going to have games where it won't come to you. Like, the flow of the game just goes the other way, the opponent does the right thing, you get unlucky a couple of times, a teammate feeds in a position. If you want the ultimate contrast to this, just remember that online year of 2020 where there was no LAN except the beginning of the year. That was the one where by the end of the year, remember, they didn't have Bit yet in NAVI, he was still on the academy team. That was the one where they still had Flamey, and that was where the numbers could be mega sus for NAVI. NAVI, if you remember, it was where it was NAVI, Astralis, and Vitality were in all the semis and finals of the online cups, and they used to even play like every week, it felt like, in an upper bracket final or something, and all the series would be mega close. If you remember what Simple had to eventually do to win games for NAVI, I've never seen a star player do this. On CT side Nuke, he just played like it was StarCraft and he was the one player controlling 4 minions and he just chose where to go. Like, he would just be like, right, I think this time, because they've hit me upper and I've took a couple of fights at the like ladder, they're going to go lower, so actually, you know what, fuck it, don't even go there. I'm going there first of all through secret and I'm just going to meet them for that duel. And essentially, I'm just going to make sure I take all the duels early on CT side and I'm going to win them. And that sounds, by the way, like the stupidest diva ego move ever, unless you're Simple in 2020 or 2021, and you can just do that. That's for real, by the way, where I understand why Simple does this, ZywOo does this. ZywOo is actually doing what normal humans and most pro players should do. Just listen to the IGL, play your role, do what you're told, and then you hit your shots. The problem is, in these scenarios, as essentially does set up, they have everything in this team. Like, I actually don't think I've ever seen a superstar player who had seemingly everything he could want, and then it's just like, look, we're not even saying, by the way, it's your fault you lost. No one is. But the point is, if you want to be the GOAT, this is the last thing you've got to add into your game. You've got to basically know when it's like, I'm not going to like do the perfect response. I'm going to be ahead of the play. I'm going to make the play I want happen. I'm going to create the scenario that I want to happen in the game. And that just doesn't seem like what he's done yet, which was fine early in his career. By the way, those players I just mentioned developed that, 6-7 years in. Like, that wasn't what they were doing in year one. But the difference is he's now had the 6-7 years. So now is the time where, tell you what, that's what should be on the big board for ZWoo for next year. Basically, become more proactive in terms of how you control the game. By the way, unironically, I would do this if I'm X-Stars. My mission for 2025 is ZWoo becomes the secondary caller or has like a voice in what we do in the round. Have you noticed how you've never heard that in an interview ever, where they go, oh, you know that great move we made off like Catwalk? Yeah, ZWoo made that call. You never heard that. By the way, they would definitely give him the props if he did it. So I feel like if he can add that to his game, because the key thing we're sort of saying is he's already got every box checked. He is mega. So anyway, to bring that back, I also feel like if you Vitality, you have the superstar you'd want. By the way, even arguably the most consistent superstar. He can even play. By the way, you can't even take a gun off him. He can use the other guns. He's unbelievable. They have the fragging power. If someone complains about Vitality's fragging power this year, I'm just going to say it. They are a sack of shit ZWoo stan who doesn't understand Counter-Strike. If you don't know, guys, Vitality ended the major as the highest rated team with a 1.17 rating. I hope you understand. Like, that is impossible. Like, nobody can get that number. That is like the crazy... And they can do that, by the way, tournament to tournament. I've seen them have the highest stats over and over again, not just from ZWoo. As said by dusT, the map pool, by the way, I don't know what complaints I'm supposed to have. I said this, if you go back during the year, pick every time they're in a massive tournament and they make the semis. If you go and look before the match, they are always with the advantage in the veto. It is mental. I've actually not seen a single team in current Pro CS that can out-veto Vitality because of the strengths they have across the board. And by the way, if you want a statement for you, that can't even be said about Prime Astralis. The problem Prime Astralis had in terms of getting beaten was almost no team had the right veto to match them. But if you'd have made a team, for example, that was like Mega at Mirage, so they had to honour the permaban, you play like, I don't know, Train when it was in the pool, which was at the edge of the Astralis veto, you go on Overpass, which was more in the middle. There was maps you could get to. The point is, there's no team in this entire space that every time they play Vitality goes, we're always getting 2 out of our 3 better maps compared. That doesn't exist. You can get more good maps for you. Like, that's why G2 Vitality was a mega series. They would just get 3 maps both teams like. But you're never favoured. So I actually think it's bonkers. I actually think at the end of time, this is a squad where, one, it shows that teams in CS aren't just about 5 individuals. Because all the 5 individuals, I think all the individuals are totally fine. All fit the roles. But something was missing. I mean, you've heard these stories. They're real about the internal friction. Something was missing in the team aspect. They didn't become more than the individuals. But also, I've never seen a team that, for me, had so few, like... Here's the thing, we're doing picking minutiae of like the problems of ZWoo, etc. These aren't glaring problems. These are very, very small problems. It's why actually, if you notice, a lot of people I feel like have finally come to my side of like, oh, I'm not trying to cut 2 or 3 Vitality players. I'm actually asking questions like, what's this coach doing? Like, have we got adaptations here? Like, why are we having the same issues at the same points in the tournament? That's the bigger picture I look at. I actually think this is going to go down as one of the biggest missed opportunities ever. I think they could have run the table this year.
Yeah, they had a super opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely tough for me because, like, yeah, I could agree that their Anubis started to fall off, and I can also agree that their Inferno was a little bit mid, but like every other map, they are absolutely mega the last several months and really just throughout the course of the entire year. So, as you said, their map pool should have been covered. I think they really did have probably the best map pool of anyone kind of towards the end of the year. Again, you know, overall talent absurd. Strong tactically. Like, the only real things I'd really say that, you know, obviously could have impacted them was, you know, this whole situation with Spinks wanting out or something like that. If that internal friction caused something, obviously Mezzi had to sit out a tournament and they had to play with Jax as a stand-in for an event. You know, like there's little things like that. I think Apex came out with like an interview recently where he felt like at the end it didn't really feel like a real team anymore because of some of the issues that they were dealing with internally. But even with all that said, and even with like the things that y'all pointed out about ZywOo, like, you know, kind of the really nitty-gritty details, by the way, the fact that you still had all these other things going for you and you still didn't win more than 1 tournament to me is kind of astounding because, again, when you compare it to kind of their peers, like some of these teams were facing way worse shit than they were. Like, you know,
think of the IM Dallas one. They won with Stewie 2K, who isn't even a pro player right now. He just stood in.
Exactly. Then we talk about how Spirit struggled to find a supporting cast around. Like, again, we were nitpicking to critique ZywOo, by the way. Meanwhile, you had Spirit, who rarely had a supporting cast for Duncan, still managed to win 4 events. Like you said, you already talked about the whole Dallas situation with G2. That's wild. We always talked about how Mouz were like studio merchants that couldn't do it on the big stage, yet they still won 2 tournaments. And it's just like, to me, there's just no excuse that they only wound up with 1 trophy at the end of this year. And most damning of all, by the way, does have to be this quarterfinals match against FaZe in this major. Like, yes, like we're all happy that the miracle run happened for FaZe and it's crazy. But going into that game, there's no way Vitality should be losing that quarterfinals match, man. And they had to be the.
By the way, when I did the veto for that one, I even said there isn't even going to veto for FaZe. There is no Carrigan-like banter angle. You just, essentially, all Carrigan can do is choose what map to lose on. There's no, like, map where I win. You can just choose one. Like, hopefully they didn't prep this. Like, there was no winning map even. I ran through every possible permutation, mate. There was nothing.
I'm pretty sure on betting websites, actually, the FaZe Vitality one was the most lopsided. Even compared to, like, Spirit Liquid, because and also even G2 Heroic, those were closer in terms of betting on.
But it's the reason why my only bet wasn't a series bet, because you could never get any value on Vitality. It was just at Vitality 2 zeros. That's the only angle you could get any value. Essentially, to say FaZe can't even win a map is what they're telling you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I could take over. I think, like, okay, the one last thing is that, to just add on to this point briefly, is that, watching the FaZe comms videos, I can say with certainty, those are so much crazier and so much is being said than any Vitality comms I've ever heard over the last 2 years. Like FaZe comms is like every single person is giving pieces of info and saying what they're going to do next at all times. And that's why Kerrigan has talked about, like, okay, maybe I need to reel them in a little bit more. But with Vitality, they just want to sit on their hands a lot more. Like, they all just want to play their favorite spots a lot more. Spinks and Flames, I'd say, are exceptions to this a little bit. They sometimes want to go for something a bit more aggressive. They want to go for a push. But, like, it feels, when I watch Vitality versus FaZe is proactive to a fault. Vitality is probably reactive to a fault.
By the way, I will tell you, it'll have to be a little bit of time, but literally, I can give you the real story on what went on, and it's all just internal drama, by the way. It's nothing to do with players, like, skills or role. It's just stupid internal drama, but it's just going to have to, obviously, this lineup still exists right now. We have to wait a little bit till it's safe, and then it'll all come out, don't worry.
Yeah. I'll do my bad point then. So with another team that sort of failed to live up to expectations for me has to be Mouz. That just, the studio merchant moniker, you could take that one way or another, given what they did at Rio, how they beat the Mongols on stage. They actually did it from a great comeback, actually, on Ancient, and then they started to just kind of, win out the series from there. But it still feels like when you watch Mouz in these high-pressure games, they play at 80%, and I might even be generous, to what they're capable of in arenas. And that's why, I've said this so many times this year, and I'm going to say it again, that to me, if there's any team that just needs to level up one aspect of their game and go on to potentially be an era-defining team, it's been Mouz for me. I feel like the roles are incredibly balanced. I feel like Shuhei's mid-round calling is excellent when he's in the zone. I feel like the individual onus that they put onto the players when it's working looks like some of the best in the world. Like, Brolin takes the right amount of initiative. Torzy can find his shot when he needs to. Exertion, obviously, is a great opener with Shuhei, and Yimpat, you never even have to worry about that guy. And that's even against the best teams in the world in a studio environment. But when they go into arenas, they are just by far the worst team at holding their own. Like, looking at arena numbers and the drop off in performance, Exertion is just by far the worst player on this team. He drops off by a 0.17 rating. Like, that is just that's so crazy. For me, it's like, Zywoo went down like 0.10, but for Exertion to go down by 0.17 in arena games is just so inexcusable, man. Like, and then when I watch the POVs of Exertion in, like, arena performances versus in studios, it's just the dude doesn't care about his life at all. Like, he turns into a soldier when he's in an arena. Like, with the smallest modicum of pressure, he's just a guy that is just strafing into an angle until he sees a fight, and usually by that time the opponent has kind of, like, made a move, set up their play, like they've gone for something that usually by the time it happens is like they're the ones that are taking the initiative on him, even though he's the one strafing to the angle. Like usually they're breaking a smoke. They're the one that's shooting around it. But Exertion is just kind of like, he's so haphazard with his own life in arena games. It just, like, watching him run down middle on Mirage, it honestly looks like he's inting half the time. Like, he actually looks like this guy is not going to stop for anything. Flash, nade, molly. Whereas in a studio environment, I see those nades and he slows down. He'll look at the battlefield, he'll weigh it out, he'll measure it, he'll say, okay, let's go for something a little bit later. But it's like Exertion just wants to end every round in 30 seconds when I watch him play in arenas. It's so disappointing because I feel like he's so much more careful and measured when he's in a studio environment. And I feel like when you have your entry fragger, who for many people, like a lot of people would say that Exertion's the best player for Mouz this year. He was fighting with Zywoo for ESL Pro League MVP, arguably should have won it. And honestly, his highs just have felt higher than practically anybody else on this lineup. He is the least dependable person when it comes to a big stage moment or even a high pressure moment. So I think Mouz, their inability this year to put it all out in a high pressure moment, they didn't capture a single arena trophy by the way. Like FaZe at least won Chengdu over Mouz, which also should have probably been a Mouz victory if we're being completely honest.
Sure.
Like, it's just consistently been so disappointing. And the thing is that it does come down to the players, because at this point, I know with a certain level of just of certainty, like Shuhei's good in arenas. Like, he got that Gamer Legion team who became practically irrelevant after him to the grand finals of a major in, and everybody else just seems like they want to let him down. Like Torji and Shuhei are the two guys that I can depend on in arenas at this point. But everybody else, Yimpat, Brolin, and Exertion most particularly, have really let down this team in these kind of environments.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I was actually one of the ones that was trying to contrast the desk and try to push the narrative that Mouse were getting better in the arena environment, because I saw what they were capable of at Cologne placing top 4, and I saw what they were capable of at Rio beating Fury on home soil in Brazil against a rowdy Brazilian crowd and coming second place at that event. And I was like, yeah, like this team has had struggles in the past. Like, you look at IM Dallas is probably the biggest example where they flopped big time outside the studio environment after winning like a smaller Bet Boom event. And then obviously winning EPL season 19. And I was like, maybe they're going to round the corner, though, because of how well they had played Cologne and Rio. But yeah, it was a struggle for them throughout the course of this major. And really, one of the big things that you kind of see is with Mouse Sports, like I agree with Maui 100%. Like I think they're tactically one of the best teams in Counter-Strike. I'd probably put them like maybe second behind Navi. I think Shuhei is one of the best IGLs in the world. Fantastic. I think Torzi's one of the most underrated oppers in the world. Like, yeah, he's not a Munacy. He's not like one of these crazy flashy guys, but like I do think that he plays the role extremely well and is one of the guys that actually is stable for them whenever you get into the bigger games. Like he has the least fall off of anyone, it feels like. Jimmy is I think Bit probably is best anchor for most people, but I think that Jimmy is certainly like one of the people that you would put like in a top list for that particular role in his own right. But then you get to someone like Xerxin, and I'll be honest with you, like just in general, if you go look, his last 3 months in general has been like a major fall off compared to the rest of the year, which is really unfortunate considering like how much of a star player he had been for them. And we were talking earlier about players who take like extremely high amounts of opening duels on the T side, and we talked about like Donk, Xantaris, Malbs, Elige. You run down this list. Well, Xerxin is indeed one of those guys that is in that like 30% or higher column, but he does have the worst success rate, particularly these last 3 months. And that is something that's going to hurt, because if he's going out there, like Maui says, and he's taking such a high amount of opening duels, and he's only coming up with like a 43% success rate or so, like that's putting him at the level of someone like Rain, by the way. And that's no shot to Rain, but like Xerxin is supposed to be one of those guys that can be, like a big name. Like maybe he's not going to get you the crazy numbers that Donk gives you or Xantaris gives you or Elige gives you, where they're like well above 50%, but you got to be somewhere up in the high 40s, like to really make sure that your team is going to be efficient in those early round situations, especially because he is just so much more aggressive than anyone else. I mean, the next guy on the list on that team is Brolin, and he's more of like an extremity player that'll occasionally go for it. And I will say Shuhei, for his credit, like throughout the major, did go for more openings and actually was pretty successful for an IGL standards, but it just seems like at the end of the day, like it still just wasn't enough. And this Mouse Sports team to me was one of those squads that looked like they had so much potential to win more trophies and to be like a team that could catapult themselves up the rankings, especially whenever some of the other teams were having their struggles, but they just never really did it. They just never really were able to finally beat that narrative of like being able to do it on the big stage. And sure, they beat Mongols in this playoff, but as soon as they got into the semis, it was over with pretty quickly. And Xerxin, again, had another really damning series, like he had the last several months. So something is going to have to, unfortunately, this Mouse Sports may not continue on. Like we may see like people leave or whatever based on rumors and whatnot. But it's one of those teams where like, damn, if they could just figure out a couple of things, they could have been like a super successful team this year.
This is the team where, even though as a squad, everyone always does that joke of, it's been the same way, obviously, since like 2018, of the poor man's phase. Because obviously, first of all, their players go to phase. And then secondly, they tend to have a similar composition of international team, bunch of good players. You make it work. I actually think if you were to look for this year, and we do the narratives we've done on this episode, they're the poor man's vitality. They also had everything to be one, like the second best team of the year, or big contender for the best. Like, if you look over this year, by the way, they also had a fabulous map pool. Like, even, I used to say this on some of the vetoes, even when a map would say 46% win rate, it'd be like, bro, it's like Vertigo or something. Have you ever seen them play this map? Like, they definitely can play this map, or it would be Ancient or Mirage or something. If you ever watch them play these matches, you can tell they have comfort on these maps. They know what they're doing. I even think, by the way, this is one area I'll give their coach credit. I even think they had a pretty good veto. By the way, they're not a team, you get a lot of these teams when they're trying to become the champions, who you just have your home map and you always do the same veto. They don't at all. If you don't know, this team completely vetoes based on the opponent. The second rotation ban, depending on the opponent, depending where they want to push you to. And so as a result, they're also able to create tons of good veto scenarios, which basically means you have a chance in all these matches. Also, I want to just stress this. One of the things I hate is when people make it too simplistic. So the narrative became, this team just sucks in arenas. Nonsense. I've seen this team win plenty of arena games. Tell you when they suck in arenas, when they're playing the other best teams in the world. That's when it activates. I mean, by the way, like I joked earlier, you can go ask Mongols. They didn't look like they had any problems once the game got going there, mate. That was fucking jokes, wasn't it? They were having a great time. But I'll tell you what, if you make them go against a potential event winner in a big semi-final with all the stage and the walkout and that's when you can see it gets to them. And by the way, absolutely. So as a result, that's why I think this is the team you can do the parallel to the old TSM of Device and Dupree and all those guys, where you knew, just like then, if you put them in a tournament that wasn't big prize money in a big stage tournament, they beat everyone to win the tournament. But the next time they go to the big S-tier tournament and you put them in the semis against Fnatic, VP, back in the day, Envy, you knew they'd lose. You knew they'd always come up just some short. And just as back in the day, people used to say, well, they're all choking. I have a theory about choking and being clutch, which is it's never all five players either way. What happens is you have like the seed or the essence of choking or being clutch, vice versa, and it germinates out into the team. Like, you rub off on the people around you, and essentially there are players in teams where in a different team they were considered the choker, and then they come to another team and suddenly their role makes sense, they're comfortable. By the way, I'd say Shiro looks way more clutch in Spirit than he did in Cloud9. Like, he looks like he fits his role more. He doesn't have the same weight of the world on his shoulders. He can sort of play a bit more loose, depending on the players. So one of the problems they have in their team is, first of all, just like Device, I always identified was the main person in Astralis/TSM I thought choked. Exertion is the clear choker in this team. The others choke a little bit, just like the old TSM players used to choke a little bit. But the difference is theirs is more hit and miss. Like, first of all, if people don't know, the time they had that like 6-week span where they lost to everyone, that's when, no joke, everyone just fragged like shit. That's all it was. Everyone's numbers went completely in the toilet and they just didn't even play the CS. That wasn't they were losing games where they played well and the team out-thought them, outshot them. They just played like shit for a few weeks. It all collapsed. Exertion is the player where, if I'll give him the diss, yeah, he definitely has disappeared in a million stages. But the inverse of that also applies. He is the main reason you win games. Because I tell you what, if Donk doesn't exist, this guy's the scariest entry player in the world. Like, when he goes off in a group stage game, you cannot do anything. Like, then you've got all these skilled players coming as follow-up and all these clutch players at the end of the round. No wonder you win a million fucking maps. No wonder you can match up with anyone in the game. But that player, that's the problem with that one, is that when it's an individual star player, especially when it's a star, you can't really do anything about it as a team. If that's their own quest they're on to figure that out. And when they figure it out, by the way, everything might be awesome. They might win everything. Sadly, they might figure it out in another team, which is the downside, which is, by the way, another secret reason why I always crowbar that it's Exertion I want to join FaZe, because I feel like that's exactly the sort of players I want to rub off on him. Speaking of which, that's the one flaw of Mouz. If you actually had to look now in hindsight at their lineup, the flaw is their veteran is fucking Brolan. And I still think of Brolan as like a somewhat inexperienced player who hasn't been in a million fights. That's the one thing this team lacks. It's why people shouldn't over-index on young stars. What you actually want is you want 2 or 3, but then you want pieces that have been there for a long time, that can be stable, that don't have these issues. By the way, that can even tell you things that's underrated, which is when you're in a team, one of the things people try to say is why you need veterans in the NBA. They just bumble it. They make it sound like it's just like, the fucking cheering off the bench and shit, which doesn't even exist in CS. No, it's things like this. It's like if you had a guy who used to play with Kobe Bryant or like fucking Tim Duncan or something, when there's a young star in your team who plays the same role as them, he can go, this is what Kobe used to do before a game to prep. That's the shit that's worth its weight in gold, because that's almost like a coaching tip that you're just getting from a former teammate. That's where I feel like Mouz was just missing like one true vet. Like, here's the biggest joke of all. If you actually wanted to change a team like Mouz and run the year back, what you'd actually do is, this is the team you'd put like a Dupree on or something like that, You'd put a player like that into a squad like this, and then it'd potentially transform it. Imagine if Device played Torshi's fucking role in this team. That'd be a different squad entirely, even though the rest of them could be the same player. So yeah, I actually think it's a tragedy. I actually think this is another team that should look back on this year and go, look, we got a couple of trophies, that's good, but fuck, how many times were we in the playoffs where like we were supposed to be the dark horse to win the whole thing? And the other thing that really bums me out about them in the arena games is they also just didn't make many finals, mate. That's the worst thing. Because I'm with you, actually, Dustin. If you ever watch how they played in Chengdu, they probably were actually the best team. But I tell you what, in the final, FaZe just did the FaZe shit. They didn't collapse, and they just got him in 3, yeah.
It's one of those things where like Mouse Sports is almost damned by the success of their own academy system, because that's where all these players came from. Like, Torzy, Jimmy, like these.
Everyone except Roland.
Yeah, everyone except for Broline. And then obviously Shuei did at least have like an extent like with Gamer Legion before coming back to the main Mouse Sports team after his time on the academy team. So he had a little bit more tenure to him. But yeah, everybody else on this team is indeed like straight from the academy system into Mouse's main team. And then were a really damn good team, but just weren't good enough to be able to get more titles than what they got. Pretty consistently kind of in that top 5 range. Their only damning result to me was like the EPL Season 20 event, where they did so much more than they probably should have done. But yeah, it is one of those things where I think you're right. Like, if there was just a little bit more veteranship on this team, they probably could have done a little bit better. And the thing is, like, these players that we're harping on, they're still so young in their careers that they could definitely turn it around. Like, it's just, will it happen on this team? Maybe not, and maybe it shouldn't. Like, maybe that is what has to happen. Like, maybe these players do have to blend in on other teams with more experienced players and kind of just become, a developing star somewhere else, as opposed to just doing it all together as a 5-man unit on Mouse Sports. But, I mean, only time will tell in that regard.
My bad point, and I very carefully chosen this as bad, not ugly, is NAVI. And not Navi's performance at the Major, it's just NAVI. And the reason why I say this is, I actually think the reason why I was able to pick a bunch of red flags before this Major for this team is because that's just the team they've become right now. And I have to say, the reason I'm worried is because, one, a bunch of the other elite teams are going to shuffle and potentially get even stronger and make better squads. And if you remember, NAVI very rarely actually dominated opponents. They would just win by using proper CS and doing the right things and winning as a team. And they would get, and all they needed to do, by the way, is win by that much. And that's all that matters. They kept getting through the matches. So first of all, I always thought the margins were a bit slim. Secondly, they never have had the superstar play. They haven't had the donk Ziwu. They have no one comparable to that. Even if you think Bit's the best anchor in the world, he's nowhere close to the best rifler. Even if you think fucking GL's the best impact player, he's nowhere close to the best rifler. You know what I mean? They don't have the one superstar that gets you out of trouble like the donk Ziwu players do. And then on top of that, when they were at their absolute peak was when they used to just win, low joke, 90% of Mirage games, which everyone plays except like 1 or 2 teams that can veto it, right? The problem you have there is that's not a real thing, guys, that you can go into a boot camp and write on a blackboard. We need our Mirage home pick to be 90%. That's not a thing. That doesn't exist. Like, that's just a moment in time where everything was awesome and you had the read on the map and everything was going great and you knew what you did. That you can't just replicate that again. So I have to say, the reason I think it's bad is I actually get worried now for where the trajectory for NAVI is, because your results were so good that in theory you never make a roster move now. You have to, for the sake of the players, go, look, you've earned it. You have to at least get the next part, like at least the first half of this next season. I have to give the same roster a go in case it's the best again. But I tell you what, some of the things that are sort of negatives mixed with if other teams upgrade in certain ways, I get a little bit concerned. Like, for example, think of the 2 teams we just went into detail on. If Mouz and Vitality did the right moves, suddenly we've got even more dangerous opposition to face against, teams that can battle us, can beat us. So I'm feeling like this is like a real crisis moment for NAVI. It might not feel like it because you look look at the year and you've had a fabulous year. You only had 1 or 2 letdowns, but the letdowns were right at the end. One of them was in the biggest moment of the whole year. Because, by the way, since you did win that first major at minimum as a dark horse, you never had the same pressure when you won that major as when you were trying to win this one. This was the one, by the way, where you were always going to go so much for it being a flip, and you didn't even make the playoffs. So, first of all, that's fucking aged very poorly, that whole plan. And then also, now it's just made the year end on the ultimate low. Like, I wonder where this squad's going, because everyone, it's implied to me behind the scenes there won't be a roster move, and no one's even implying that they're going to go to this team or someone might get kicked. So I don't know what happens next year for Navi. What are your thoughts?
It's one of those things where, like, not only did they not make the playoffs, they didn't really beat anybody. Like, if we look at it, like the RMR, they won with games over Fnatic, Sinners, and Saul. The only top team that they played was Mouz, and they lost. Then when you look at the major itself, they beat Liquid, they beat Gamer Legion, and then, yeah, like they lost to Made Brazil Spirit. Then they obviously lost to Heroic in that final series that would have determined who was going to.
By the way, those aren't really the craziest teams to lose to either. You know what I mean? Like, those aren't some killers.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like, it's even worse than just not making the playoffs. It's the fact that the quality of play that they just had throughout the major in itself was terrible. Obviously, the whole Blast World Finals thing before the major was giant red flags too. Well, at first, I kind of written it off as like maybe just like a one-off type of thing because of the 6 finals before that. But then all of a sudden, those red flags carry over. And you're right. It was the situation with Mirage is probably the biggest one, where they had such an incredible win rate, but by the end of it, they had lost 6 of their last 9 games. And then the other issue was that they had to ban Vertigo. It was a perma. They couldn't flex it, and then their nuke also fell off.
By the way, that's not a minor detail, Dust. Almost everyone else, like, for example, when FaZe plays G2, FaZe gets to not have to ban the Vertigo, but when G2 plays certain other teams, they can fuck with it. Navi was the only one that always had to honor the permaban. If you noticed that, they just had to do that. So that's why I don't think that the super team people made them out to me, mate.
Yep, that, and then again, like, I think their nuke was also something that fell off entirely. The only saving grace is that they actually did beat Heroic on in that best 3, but it wound up not mattering because they lost Ancient in the end anyway, which was wild because Ancient was the other map that they were supposed to be bonkers on outside of Mirage. Like, the fact that you even let that slip against Heroic in that deciding series is really damning. And look, like, I've always really enjoyed Navi just because, you know, obviously they're technically very sound. They did have a great map pool, and yes, while they didn't have a superstar player, their talent was very evenly distributed. And I also like the fact that they were one of those teams where everyone could create an opening. Everyone could go for the opening frag. Like, yes, Ema was your main entry fragger, but JL and Bit could go for plays on the extremities. They could be like secondary entry type people. They could be trade fraggers and executes. And I thought that was really cool because no other team really composed themselves in that way. Like, that was a stat I kept running, was like the equal distribution of opening attempts on the T side. Like, it was crazy, like, that they could get it from really anyone and no one else could really do that. But that does become the problem later on, is when you don't have that key star player you can rely on to dig you out of a hole, to have that bright moment to kind of like help get everyone back on track. And that is tough. And yeah, they were the one team that, because of their success, there was never any rumblings about any roster changes on the horizon for this team. And you're right, they probably still won't do it just because they are still technically probably the team of the year, despite bombing the major and bombing the Blast World Final. They still did so much with the major win and with the other 6 finals that they made in a row and the 3 other additional titles they have around the major. And they still, you know, if they could figure out a way to fix their nuke and Mirage and figure out a way to get people back on track individually, they still could be a very strong team going forward. But it is tough that, like, your main star players, Shale and Bit, just fell off so massively the last couple of events of the year. And it's really tough to me because, like, it's one of those things where, like, Navi were on the brink of having the first era of CS2, or at least you were going to have to have that argument, right?
Yeah,
like, you were going to have the conversation because they would have won Copenhagen if they could have won this major, or at least had a very deep run, like make a finals or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like that compared with all the other success, they would have been, like, not only team of the year, but perhaps like the Navi era is upon us. And instead, they just, like, petered out so hard these last couple of events of the year, and it's just so depressing because, like, we all want to witness greatness, and it's so frustrating. They were on the brink of having it and then just fell apart right at the very end.
Yeah, I'd say that the thing about Navi is that, you know, the reason we love CS is that you have this mechanical side where people like Donk just blow us away, people like MonteCristo blow us away, but the great equalizer is that people who invest more time in mechanics probably aren't thinking about the game in the same way as people like Blade, people like Alexi. And if you watch Navi in their prime this year, they were easily the best team to use misdirection, especially on T side, to just shoot people in the side or the back of the head. And I wish that data that we had at our, you know, readily available data went a bit further, because I would bet money that Navi won the most advantaged fights of any team in Tier 1 CS. And on a, on the contrary, I'd say that G2 are probably winning the most fights while disadvantaged. That's why we rate their firepower so highly. And so to have Alexi B and Blade shoulder that burden so heavily, it just means that the game plan was all or nothing. And that's also why I felt you watch Navi play in these series and they just get blown out on a map. And that's why they were able to win the major despite having a sub 50% win rate on rounds. Like they were getting blown out on the maps that they lost so badly, but then the maps that they won, it was mostly due to the game plan. It's why you could, if you're on a team like that, it's so easy to mentally reset because all you can say is you throw your hands in the air and say, okay, the game plan wasn't that good on that map. Okay, we didn't really have a great idea of how we wanted to play Inferno that time. But then you go into Mirage, you go into Nuke, you go into a map where you just feel that Blade and Alexi were in the lab cooking last night, and then you just follow the game plan to a T, and then you win. And yes, there is a level of individual ability that you have to have. Like that's why they couldn't just have complete bums on this team, working through the system that Blade and Alexi created. But you didn't have to have anybody on the team that's a true world superstar. Like, I'd be surprised if anybody on Navi, maybe JL gets 5th on HLTV's top 20, but I would be, no one was really vying for world number 1. If anything, we're giving all the accolades and awards to Alexi and Blade. And so for Navi to crash out in that fashion, it sucks because all these other teams that are in the playoffs kind of get to do both. They kind of have a good in-game leader, but then they also have excellent players. Like, come on, you look at the players on FaZe, and at their peak, I'm taking Frozen over practically any rifler on Navi. I know that people are going to be like, what? Like, didn't you see what JL and Bit did this year? It's like, dude, throughout a whole year, you leave Frozen on any team in the world, and I think he's going to be better than JL. Like, that's like,
unfair.
Yeah. So, and I think like the same thing could be said about like, when you and Kassad brought up that thing about Nerds being better than JL, I think it was a fun debate at the time because JL was on a heater in the Navi system. But again, yeah, it's one of those things. It's like,
put it this way, this. If we start today, we're going to draft players for next year. If I get Nerds, if I have a choice of Nerds or JL, I'm taking Nerds immediately. You can have JL, mate. You can take it.
Yeah, I understand.
No problem with that.
I understand that.
No problem with that.
JL's great in a system.
Yeah,
I think JL might even be better than Nerds in a system.
Sure.
But Nerds can just make his own. He can create his own plays. Same thing with Wonderful. Probably got overrated as an opera this year because he got to play so many cushy, kind of comfy spots as an opera. And then when you watch them lose to Heroic, like Wonderful just missed a lot of shots. Like he had a lot of opportunities and he just missed. And the mechanics do need to be there for you in some respect because you need to play CT side. Like your CT side is driven by you needing to kill 1 to 2 people as they run into your bomb site. And simply put, Navi just couldn't do that at this major against the elite teams. Every time they faced them, if they were getting run at by multiple people, I think they just kind of felt like the strats would carry them, but it's like, guys, you do need to hold your mice yourselves. Like Blade can't like possess your right hand and shoot them for you, even when you're in the right position. So that's what's disappointing about Navi. It's that we finally got to see a team that was breaking the star-driven systems of so many other rosters with great tactics. And then at the end of the year, the bare minimum that they needed to have any semblance of a floor was not met by the individual players.
It's one of those things where like they lived and died by the same sword. Like they were so strong throughout the course of the year because they didn't just have to rely on EMA to create openings for the team. JL and Bit could do it on the extremities, and they therefore had so much flexibility on being able to throw feints, being able to create like dual pressure across the map, be able to get those openings to like get their mid-round flow going, no matter where the entry point was at, because JL could go for it or Bit could go for it. But then by the end, but those two players, JL and Bit, couldn't do anything close to what they were doing the rest of the year. Like these were two guys who were like well above 50% success rates on the T side while taking a pretty good amount of opening duels. And then by the time you get to the end of the year, these guys are like low 40s, high 30s. Like it was an insane drop off. And the only person who wound up keeping it up was EMA. EMA was the only one who like managed to somewhat keep the same level, even when they were struggling these last several events. But at the end of the day, that just isn't enough. And so they basically lived through the fact that they had such a great distribution of talent, but then they died the same way whenever that talent completely fizzled away and they didn't have one star to lead them through it. So yeah, it is just kind of a tough one at the end of it all.
Well, Navi's battery might have run out at the end of the year, but that won't be a problem for you if you have Turtle Beach as your headset / your peripherals, because this is the Stealth 700 and it has up to 80 hours battery life and it has a quick charge function, which, by the way, if you don't know, if you've only used old school stuff with batteries on, the modern day chargers are unbelievable how fast they charge. Basically, they charge faster than the amount of time you can then play the actual item. So if you're going to go on a trip, obviously this can be a wireless one. This is mega for that. Also, one thing I was really worried about whenever I hear anything's like a gaming headset is I'm used to the era where that means the build quality will be really shoddy. This is not. There's actually really good build quality. It's also crucially quite comfortable. Like, I have quite a big head, so I don't like those headphones where they like just fit around the ears because they tend to like crush my ear. This doesn't do that. These really comfortably, almost like those helicopter ones you see players use on stage. They fit right round your ears. They do that thing also where, as a result, even just putting them on almost has a noise cancelling effect because you can feel like it shuts out all the air and all that stuff. Then also, it's got like features on here where it's got like AI based microphone noise reduction and echo cancelling. So if you're not someone who like has a perfect setup, etc., it's actually going to help you with that in terms of people being able to hear what you're saying on your mic, and it'll take out all the crap from the background, etc. Like, spoiler, when that Maui's doing this episode, he's in a hotel room using a laptop. Sometimes you hear the whir of the laptop. That would all in theory get taken out if he was using this headset. So yeah, I think it's actually excellent. Like, again, I'm normally a little bit wary of gaming headset stuff. This actually seems like a mega one, especially for the price point. It's way better than all the ones I've seen in the past. And like I said, if you keep it reliably charged, which is easy to do, you won't run out of battery life. If you do, it charges really quickly anyway. So as long as you've got like 20 minutes, half an hour, you're going to be in good shape. So get the ultimate immersive gaming experience with Turtle Beach today, and obviously support us and save some money, because for a limited time only, head to turtlebeach.com and use the code, it's on the screen, CSGO, easy to remember. What was the best CS in recent years? CSGO, for 10% off your entire order. That's 10% off at turtlebeach.com with promo code CSGO. Thank you to Turtle Beach and anyone who buys that. Obviously, maybe a little bit late to buy it for Christmas, but excellent gift for a gamer in your life for next year in 2025. Right, let's go on now to the ugly, which is going to start where, dusT? Where are we going for ugly on this one?
I guess this one was kind of an obvious one, and it's a beaten narrative, but it has to be continued, and that is just Falcons on all fronts. It's been just such an ugly situation, and I feel like it's only really gotten worse over these last like couple of months with like all the different rumors and stuff that were going on, as well as some interviews that kind of came out. So obviously, like if you're just looking at Falcons as a whole, they had a terrible season. They never got the blockbuster news that they wanted to begin with. Snappy never got the stars that he was promised. Sun Pius got a raw deal being their best player, but still wound up getting benched for Simple, which was essentially them just giving up and like gambling on the fact that Simple will be a superstar that could somehow just like carry them. And that was essentially what Zonik said in the interview when the whole Simple move happened. It's just like, you know what? Everything's gone to shit. Let's go ahead and pick up Simple, see if he can be Simple. And if he can, maybe we can make something happen. And so like really the whole situation just went to crap. And really where it gets ugly is on the point of Zonik as a coach and his legacy, and then just the general future of Falcons going forward. So essentially with Zonik, you have a guy who obviously was considered like one of the GOAT coaches, right? He won 4 majors with Astralis. He won a major with Vitality. And, you know, he is like this coach with just so much aura around him. Then he goes to Falcons and he kind of puts out there that he wants to be the bag. Like he thinks he's the bag. It's not just about the money that Falcons can afford to give players. It's the fact that he's this god coach and that like he should be able to put a team together at Falcons that can be competitive and go out there and do big things. Well, he doesn't get what he wants for sure. Like they lack firepower, but at the end of the day, I do think that there's something to be said about when you're the coach of the team, you still have to do the most with what you've got. You still got to try to make something happen. And even if you lack firepower, you have to find out ways to like be crafty and still get results at the end of the day. And like when you listen to some of the interviews that have come out recently from Zonik, you know, he basically said that from day one assigned the team, we knew that this roster was only temporary. And then, you know, we knew that we didn't have the firepower that we need. Since day one, I had concerns about this lack of firepower and informed Falcons that this wasn't going to work. And then he had this other quote where he says, I think a lot of why we didn't perform was more mental because people inside the team didn't have any belief in this roster. Bro, you're the coach. Like, you're supposed to be solving these problems, or at least attempting to, at least trying to get people on the same page, at least trying to still keep people motivated and, like, you know, get something out of it. Like, yeah, maybe you're not going to hit the highs that you thought you were going to hit because you didn't get the roster that you wanted, but you can still at least do something. You can still at least do better than some of these other teams that had way lesser names than you and still managed to surpass you on an almost regular basis throughout the course of the year. And then I think here's the big thing that like is ugly about Falcons going forward is we've already had it come out that like Simple trial is going to lead to nothing, that apparently he isn't going to join the team full time. You've had this whole situation happen where, yes, you are going to get Nico, so you're going to have Nico and Magixx, but now we don't know what is going to come to that. because now there's already been rumors, swirling around, or maybe not even rumors, basically, that like G2 have all but confirmed that they're not going to sell MonteCristo to Falcons, which a lot of people were kind of latching onto that move as like the big thing that could happen with Simple not joining is, at least we can keep like the Nico MonteCristo duo together. And that is a duo you probably should be trying to keep together, right? And then there was also this whole thing about like Jimmy was supposed to come over, which, great anchor player, great passive rifler, would have helped balance out the roles in this team quite a lot. Well, apparently like his movement to Falcons was kind of somewhat tied to like whether or not MonteCristo was going, because he didn't want to waste his time perhaps joining this team if they weren't going to have like enough to like build around him. And so it's like at the end of the day, you get Nico, you get magixx, but are you going to have to basically do the exact same thing and settle again like you did this entire season? So does that mean that we're going to have to sit here now and wait until 2026 whenever like MonteCristo's contract runs out and you're able to pick him up that way? So like basically we're doing another, it's almost like we're just doing 2024 all over again with Falcons, where we're just going to have to settle on the fact that they don't get the roster that they want, but they're still going to have to try to make something happen and then hope that they can get people later on. So it's like, when are we ever going to get the quote unquote like real Falcons? And sure, look, I do know that Falcons has, so much money, and eventually they will be able to long-term piece together the roster that they will want and will be able to get titles going. But the fact that it's taken this long to get anything like somewhat good going is kind of absurd. And I do think at a certain point that like this is going to have some type of negative impact on Sonic's legacy as a coach, because like now it's like if you're a great coach, you're supposed to be able to do great things even if you don't have the best pieces. And then eventually this team will get great pieces. And so at that point, will it actually be the great pieces that are the success of the team, or is Sonic's coaching actually a contributor to the success of the team? Like, we'll never know now, I feel like. So I don't know, man. Like the whole thing is just kind of whack at this point on all fronts. And that's kind of where I'm at with Falcons. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Thorin, do you want to take this one first? Because I wanted to take this into a direction
all
of
right.
like the wild card invite they got from Blast.
Right, what I'll say is this. On the Sonic thing, this is the reason why people can't just judge people's GOAT status off one project. It just doesn't work, because what you're doing is, what you're not saying rather is, they're the GOAT because what they did with this is the best anyone could ever have done. What you're saying is they're the GOAT, just an absolute statement, and you're ignoring the circumstances. So if you don't know the reason why I built the case before Carrigan had won a single major that he could be the GOAT IGL, even though Glaive had won 4, it's because Glaive won 4 with the same 3 teammates and 1 player swap and the same coach. Like, he had essentially, first of all, a million things you would want as an IGL, and miss me with Carrigan had them as well. He had them before. He literally did not have the same players, you idiot. Like, it'd be like saying, this guy had Tom Brady. Yeah, the difference is Tom Brady at 20 and 29 is obviously very different, isn't it? So, first of all, he had not only a lot of mega qualities, you can even say something similar when he had the ZWoo lineup. He had some mega players there too, right? But the ZWoo lineup and the Vitality Project at least showed it isn't just he has to have Danish players, or he has to have these Danish players, or if he has these players and they play this way, he can do it. He started to show he could do more in the same way as Carrigan had already shown with multiple lineups. So if you remember, when Sonic was only the Astralis coach, I always used to say the same thing. I used to say, everyone goes, he's the GOAT, and there's no... and I'm just, what are you talking about? I used to say, my boy Zeus is right there. He's won a couple of majors. He was on Team Liquid. I even said, look, it's not on the same level, but if you wanted to talk about good coaching, I've always thought what Kassad did with Renegades is fucking unbelievable, mate. Like, he had him in semis of majors and shit like that, and regularly making playoffs and doing deep runs. He had no business doing that with that roster. By the way, go look what that roster did before and after Kassad. He was the fucking magic man for them. So I've always thought people never considered that, like, actually, there is no GOAT for roles like that are dependent on who plays for you and do they buy into your system. Like, you have to have a lot of things go right. Now, I will say, Falcons might be the most anything's ever gone wrong. Like, I always think the worst thing about how Falcons is populated is, here's what I don't get. People seem to really act like you can just win things without star players. I don't understand it. I'll never get it. Because here's one thing that's so disingenuous. All the motherfuckers going, how could you cut Sampaius? Spent the whole year saying every Falcons player, including Sampaius, is trash and he's not a good AWPer. You can all gaslight me. I have an amazing memory. I spent the first 4 to 5 months of this year, when they did that kind of 8-tier run, telling you actually people like Sampaius look fine, mate. Like, it actually seems pretty good still. Like, it's just at the time, the only good AWPers were m0NESY and ZywOo. Like, that was it. Even people like Wonderful World, top players. Torji, by the way, is up and down. Like, AWP was very weak at the beginning of the game. So I think, first of all, people didn't give credit that, like, the only star player was Pius, and even then, AWP is clearly nerfed compared to what it was. Then, he never had anything close to a star rifler, right? Every other team that is a great team that has the results you wanted Falcons to get has not only 1 star, they have like 2. You know what I mean? And by the way, I'll go further than that. I actually do think the problem with NAVI is all their players are like maybe could border on being a star, but don't quite get there on their own. They do it in the system. If you go look at those players, they're still better than all the riflers in fucking Falcons, mate. Like, I'll give something to magixx for like his consistency. He seems like a very cerebral player. He's never putting up like monster frags and monster numbers. So first of all, when you don't have any of those things, am I missing something? Aside from Blade with NAVI, and I think a bit of Mouz maybe, who are the super tactical teams winning with no firepower? It doesn't exist in CS2. That's not a thing. Even teams that do upsets have to have like Insani or something like that, or some like Zantares, some Elige, like, it doesn't exist. So I will say it's the hardest possible challenge for Zonic, because basically people are going, right, you don't even have the basic piece you need to win, a star rifler, but go do it anyway because you're the GOAT. It's like that. That's not how sports works, mate. Like, every great coach of all time had star players. It's usually how you use the star player that works. I do think he's had the stupidest roster angle I've ever seen, and I find it quite disappointing people have no sympathy, because he didn't sit there and go, I'm a dickhead, just give me Madden and Boros and I'll win, I am the GOAT. What he said was, can I have a team with Nico and then I want the core events? And they were like, yeah, sure thing, sir. Oh, last second, Nico didn't sign. Go and qualify for the major. And am I forgetting this? Guys, he actually did make top 4 with Boros at Katowice. Right, think of the lineup that fucking Vitality has. Zonic with Boros and this team placed ahead of that Vitality roster. Like, that's inconceivable. So to me, I don't think the idea is Zonic has to be a total fraud. Also, I don't know why it would make any pasture a fraud. Did he not do those things or something? Like, are we going to really pretend secretly, like, ZywOo and Apex came up with all the shit in Vitality, and then I guess in Astralis it was secretly magixx, Glaive, and fucking... Yeah, was it fuck? Zonic clearly did something. By the way, I'll tell you one thing I know he did do in those teams, which is mega underrated. It's what you all hate him for in that stupid fucking video he did not choose to release from the RMR, which is he is an actual disciplinarian in a world full of entitled, mega egotistical superstar teenagers, where I don't care if they say on their birth certificate dust that they're 23, they're all fucking teenagers spiritually. Stewie 2K will hit 30 and still be talking like he is 17 years old, about to graduate from high school. Like, that's just who this scene is. That's not even a diss at Stewie 2K. That is who the stars in this scene are. There's a lot of big ego ones. So I do think he's been in a very, very tough spot. But obviously, yeah, this is actually a shit job, because at the end of the day, here's one thing I also respect about people like Zonic. Zonic would tell you himself, oh, the only thing that does matter as a coach is results. Like, you can have all the reasons why it didn't work, why this player didn't play. You can have reasons like, I just gave the games not the right way, the construction. But at the end of the day, what makes you become the GOAT is you can just go look at these majors. You don't even have to make the argument, right? Hey, look how I played it. Because that's, if you do look at how I played, that's the Zeus argument. That's the Carrigan argument. No, you guys are going off majors. So Zonic himself understands this isn't acceptable. I will say, I do feel like everyone insists on misinterpreting that simple move. Here's why I'm going to get all of you guys on that simple move. You're not signing him because you actually thought you would win now. Look, you signed him in 2 reasons. One, as a last chance gasp effort that you might qualify flukily to the major. Because, by the way, just the stickers alone would probably have justified the whole thing. Secondly, you also did it quite shrewdly when the team's shit anyway, so you know you're going to replace a bunch of players, to test, do we want to try and buy him for next year? It was actually, by the way, a genius, because it was a try before you buy. If he'd have been Dynamite and it had fixed the whole thing, you probably just change like 2 players, like bring Nico in instead of, I don't know, Dupree, bring one other person in, and then suddenly you've got a good team and you just go forwards next year. It was also a way, by the way, to stress test the rest of the team, which I think it did, because I actually thought Simple on like half the maps carried, and the rest of the team was so shit they still couldn't win. Like, if anything, he proved that the others actually, in this current system, do not work. And then secondly, there's also the angle that if it worked, you then would have just said, not what we're doing now of like, oh, but you've got a team where it's going to be like magixx and Nico. We don't even know who else. You're probably going to have to bring a player back like some Pius or Snapper. No, what you would have had then if it had worked was, right, I'm starting with magixx, Simple, and Nico. Mate, I tell you what, that's a pretty nice first 3 cards to draw in fucking poker there. You know what I mean? If that's the flop, I think I'm going to win this hand, boys. That's looking pretty straight fire. So the obvious issue now is no one knows where you are on the Simple thing. No one knows if it means you're bringing some Pius back and what that affects, or God forbid you ever actually have have to bring Sappy back after you've basically just told the world you think he's shit and not required. Like, that in itself is a misplay. But again, it's all going to depend on the offseason. The stupidest thing about the whole Falcons thing is, do you just want to make it about this year? Yeah, it was shit after about like after spring, it was crap. But my problem is, no one even can yet know how it's going to be for next year. I've seen everyone already doom posting about this squad. They're not going to get this person, and now Morrissey's not going. But yeah, you boys, the offseason hasn't even begun. The roster moves haven't even begun. Everyone's shut down for Christmas now. That will all begin like the first 2 weeks of January. And if they play their cards right there, admittedly, they've done quite badly in the last off seasons. If they play their cards right there, by the way, it is apparently just confirmed they have Nico. I think it's way less of a doom position for next year. I'll give you this year. This year, at the end of the day, aside from Canavites, say, write it off. It was a waste of time. Never worked. You never even looked like you came close in the latter half of the year to even being vaguely good. Like I told you, I only ever bet on Falcons when the odds got so insane, but the map veto meant they'd get the 3 maps. I'd just be like, fuck it, I'll roll the dice for like a 3.x bet, just because why not at that point? I never bet on them because they were good. The difference is, you could still, I think, salvage some of this for next year, especially because when I say salvage, you are adding in like the ultimate pieces that go with them, like Nico and a superstar AWP or IGL. Also, the other angle for me is, it all depends actually how the other teams manage their off seasons. Normally, I would say you're in deep shit for your Falcons because it's going to be really hard to get anyone. At the moment, we've just mentioned it earlier, almost every other real top 5 team is considering roster moves. So if you're actually shrewd in your Falcons, even if you don't get who you want, you could still end up with one of those players. You know what I mean? Like maybe like FaZe. Like I've said this before. Think about how many players in current G2, FaZe or Vitality that might get kicked. That, assuming there's not some extracurricular reason, you would just pick up if you're Falcons. Why wouldn't you? And not only that, you wouldn't pick them up. You'd be picking them up for more money. They'd get a higher salary. So personally, I don't think it's as doom and gloom for next year, but I am with you. I also do think this is an example of why I personally think everything Zonic did as a coach makes him the GOAT. He has the GOAT resume. He did it on 2 different levels. He did it a whole bunch of different ways. But I will say, for fans though, the worst thing is this. If you're Zonic, bro, there are people already started watching in CS2, mate, so they never saw any of the shit you did. So they don't think you're the GOAT. They are going to assume you're a fraud. So for those people, you are gambling that part of your legacy. For the ones that remember, in the same ways we all don't go, Forrest, he was shit at the end. No, we remember when he was the best. Like we'll all remember the best. That can't ever be taken away from you. But I'll tell you what, it will absolutely change how you end your career if this is like the last chapter. Especially because the last thing to say is, even though he didn't get what he wanted, this wasn't like he asked for all these players. I will say everyone knows he did have an insane budget, so that's something no one else in history has had. So certainly, yes, there are a lot of black marks against Sonic's name this year. Yes.
I'll surmise my whole feelings of Zonic here. Just like, I still think he's the GOAT. Blade had a chance this year because Blade has 2 majors now with an incredible NAVI lineup in 2021 at Stockholm, and then obviously winning it here with a completely different lineup. You know, only overlapping player that he had was Bit, yeah. And I think that if he would have done it again with this lineup, I think there's a case that's really actually open. But then it's 5 majors to 2 right now. Blade has the advantage of doing it with 2 completely different cores. But if he actually won 2 majors with this,
by the way, I can't believe there's actually real conversations happening of, was the coach who won 5 majors a fraud? Like,
yeah, I know.
Why are we like this? Why is our community like this?
Also, let's just remind people, he did it with 2 different lineups. I know.
Yeah.
Like he did. Sure, he had magixx
like
and
that whole
again.
Vitality major victory, like certainly like boosted his
You'd think so, right?
credibility.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, no doubt about
it. It should have boosted him as much as you can only beat the teams that are in front of you. Boosts you. Sure. You know, like for Zywoo's GOAT campaign. But the things that I wanted to focus on more so beyond just like throwing my hat in the ring on that kind of issue is just like, they were obviously really they were like almost self-destructive in ways throughout this year. Like they just, nothing clicked in so many different ways. But I just kind of wanted to bring up the fact that they are entering the Blast Bounty as a wild card invite, and people are kind of speculating what that means to be a wild card invite. Like, just, I mean, this kind of shows people aren't really reading the text, which is, simply put, you can be a wild card invite if you have 3 individual players who were at any point in time over the last 12 months on a top eight ranked team by VRS. If they have Nico, that's one. If they have magixx, that's another, because after that Katowice run, Falcons were in the top 8. And then all they need is one other person that was at any point in time over the last year a top 8 player. That could actually literally be, it could be any of the other players that we think they let go, like Snappy, Modern, Senpaius. It could even be Boros, by the way. But it could also be people from G2 who were at the beginning of the year that are now gone, like Nexa and Hooksy. Okay, if they want an in-game leader, both of those guys have expressed interest in that. Okay,
that's
so there's a chance that it'd be weird, and I think Kassad right now is probably punching the air if he's listening. Like, yeah, put Hooksy on Falcons, with Nico again. But like, let's be honest, like he won a lot with Nico in the past. I think Nico has some level of trust.
It didn't seem like he was bothered by him. Yeah, he seemed fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he stuck with him as long as he did. Or also, he could just go with another in-game leader that got him to the finals of a major, which is Nexa. So there's 2 guys right there that they could pick. I think those are probably the most likely with what they want to do moving forward. But beyond that, there were a couple other teams that I noted that were also top 8 when looking at that initial announcement. Them being Cloud9 with Perfecto was top 8 at one point. Monty with SDY, Bro, and Waro 2K were actually in the top 8 at one point. And also Eternal Fire. So let's just say, like, Falcons have the money to buy out Xantares, and that's been really like what we've all been interested in. Like, is any big name team, like a tier 1 team with a big salary, going to poach Xantares? Because he's clearly the player that is probably skill per salary the most underpaid, along with the Mongols players. So just saying, there's a lot of options right there. And then they could sign literally 2 people from anywhere. They could get absolutely anybody at this point. So yeah. That just throwing that out there, like, for clarification on the whole, like, them being a wild card invite. Like, people are like, how are they sneaking into this or whatever? Or like, well, actually, Kassad is the one. He tweeted, he said something about Blast, like, this effing TO once again. And it's like, Kassad, this is how wildcard invites work via Valve's rule set. And like, for Falcons to indulge in that, and for Blast to just invite them because of it, like, what are we doing? Like, dude, you don't want.
By the way, that's also this is the part he's missing, Maui. That's what actually you want a wild card to be. You want the wild card to be. Don't we all want to see Nico playing this team, as opposed to, as you say, the real 32nd team in the world doesn't have Nico. They have 0 factor for me to be interested. They'll just come last. You know what I mean? I feel like it's not even that big a deal, that one. It's a wild
The real
card.
32nd rank, dude, by the way, the real teams that are down there are NAVI Javelins.
There you go.
Like, it's NAVI Javelin. NAVI Javelins is 31st right now, okay? It'd be another woman's team that would have made it. Like, come on. Come on, sure. Kassad. Like, if you actually just looked at the list for a second here, you would see it's NAVI Javelins. And we already have made such a fuss, like, as a community about Imperial Female making it. So, like, do you want, like, Kassad, do you want another women's team in here? Or do you actually just want Falcons with Nico, magixx, and maybe like a Nexa? Like, come on, like, be honest with
Also, by the way, let me just give you like a really fucked up, like, silver lining in all the darkness of the clouds. If there was ever a player, dusT, I wanted to see the player cam repeatedly be frustrated and have rounds go wrong on, Nico is from Central Casting, bro. This is the greatest React Andy of all time in our industry. Like, he could lose, like, they could lose a normal round and still win the series. He's like, he's doing all, he has the greatest reaction game ever. Well, look, not for your teammates, but if you're like, so much on, that's mega. I want to see that. If they're even going to tank, I want to see Nico handle that. I want to see him just break out. If he just one time, please, Nico, what? Just once, do the old school 20. Shut up! If you just did that one time, bro. Oh, that would be like, that'd be like your grandma coming back to life and giving you a hug or something, mate. That'd be fucking, the way that would make me feel so nostalgic and warm.
Yeah, I mean, to wrap this up, like, look, I do think this 1 year isn't going to ruin, like, Zonic's GOAT status argument. Like, yeah, he didn't get the pieces that he wanted at the end of the day. I just think, for me, the interviews he did, like, had, like, this negative PR light to them that I didn't really like. But, yeah, come on, he did win, like, 5 majors with 2 different teams and, like, has done a lot. And if he can get something going on this Falcons team, certainly they could still get something going. And you're right, there's, like, a lot of pieces out there. Even if they don't wind up getting, like, MonteCristo, which is, like, kind of the dream piece they wanted alongside Jimmy. Like, there's still maybe other Mouse Sports players you could pick up. You got Spinks, who apparently wants to leave. Vitality, that's another player you could probably look at. There are definitely some options out there for players that they might be able to bring on this team. And look, even if you wind up in a situation where you have like Nico and magixx, you bring Senpaius back, you bring Snappy back, he finally gets to be the IGL Nico that he wanted in the first place, and then you find like a fifth, like, yeah, they could still do some stuff. I don't mind them being a wild card invite by any stretch of the imagination. My only thing was this. It's like it just is weird to me that this org has struggled so hard to get what they wanted despite all the money that they have, and they might still have to settle at the end of the day until 2026 to truly get what they want, which is kind of tough for me. So
by the way,
that's kind of why I want that angle.
What if I was to tell you, because by the way, I think Snappy has the best scouting game in Counter-Strike. What if I told you he asked Falcons for Malbs before Malbs went to G2?
That's
pretty good.
Be shocked by that.
That's pretty good. Yeah. So the point is, these guys didn't get what they asked for, mate. They were just forced to say, like, the joke is, I asked for Malbs, I got Dupree. You know what I mean? Like, what do you want? What the fuck is this? Yeah, that's my year in a nutshell. Right, Maui, what are we doing then? What is your ugly point?
Yeah, mine is a point that I didn't really think that this was going to blow up on Twitter in the same way that it did, but it ended up being like my most replied to and liked tweet of maybe the entire major cycle, actually, which is where I talked about the fact that rookie is just kind of an interesting term in CS because donk has, I think the framing of it is why people started attacking it, because I was saying that donk has 15.7k hours in CSGO and CS2, whereas Get Right in CSGO and CS2 has 14k hours today. And so for this to be his rookie year is it's a bit odd just as a term. And I just think that the definition of rookie, the whole ugly point is that when we're, creating, it's basically for narrative building, okay? Because I think some people are like, who cares or whatever. Isn't this just semantics? Well, part of semantics, like the end goal of using semantics is for narrative building. Like if we couldn't define anything, then it would give less credence to all these events that occur in our lives. I know that's like such a crazy idea to think about, but I have to explain this because people will ask like, what's the point of labeling them a rookie then? Well, I just wanted to say that I think the definition of rookie is kind of ill-fitted for what we're doing in Counter-Strike, because whereas you have this isolated insular NBA, for example, which is it's so driven by just like, are you in the league or are you out of the league? Like Luka Doncic, for example, winning Rookie of the Year. I think that's fine. He won despite the fact that he was EuroLeague MVP, despite the fact that he had a lot of reps playing with the best competition in a whole other continent. It's still fair that he's the rookie that he's Rookie of the Year because it's his first time in the NBA. The NBA is a different caliber of opposition than otherwise would be there in Europe. Like they're isolated to that space, with the exception, of course, the Olympics. And I just wanted to say, like, in Counter-Strike, we don't have that. Like, let's just be completely blunt. We don't have that in CS. You are not isolated. It is not insulated. It is not a singular entity league that is running on its own. And the example that I gave, which for some reason, again, people couldn't really wrap their head around, or like they couldn't, whatever. I'll just say it. Like donk last year played 94 maps versus top 30 opponents while on Spirit Academy. He's been playing since 2021 against tier 1 orgs. Like he played against Movistar Riders in 2021, and they went to the major and Katowice that same year. Like, so he's been playing against these top opposition, and that's why the term rookie, it neatly fits people like in the NBA, the NFL, probably even the Premier League to an extent. I don't really follow it that closely, but I'm pretty sure you can't be a rookie like half in, half out in that space as much. But like Ultimate, for example, this year, he only played 67 maps versus top 30 opposition, but we still are going to count this his rookie year. He's still, like, next year won't be his rookie year, but the thing is, we're saying that this is the best rookie year in history with what donk is doing. I'm saying this too. Like, I'm saying it too, because the delineation, to me, in my head, is clear enough that this is his jump up to tier 1 on a tier 1 org, but Ultimate won't be given a second chance next year. Like, the Ultimate's next year will not be his rookie year. Like, that, it's over. Like, he had it. Mobs won't be Mobs' next rookie year next year, despite the fact that this year he played like 10 more maps than donk did last year versus top 30 opposition. Like, that's the difference here. It's very hard to navigate this space, and it's just that because the competition overlaps so much between tier 1, tier 1.5, and tier 2 events, people like donk have been playing against top 30 opponents for essentially years now. Like, he's essentially been playing against them for years now, and yet in this space, the definition rookie, it's like, we're crowning him best rookie year, but it's like, I'm just saying, like, in CS, rookie doesn't mean the same thing as it does in, say, traditional sports. And I feel like that's why it's just an ugly point. It makes narrative building a little bit awkward in this space, whereas it's very clear in trad sports.
Is it though? Like, cause and this is like a question more than like me challenging you. Like, so for example, like if you look at the NFL this year, you obviously have like this race for like offensive rookie of the year. I don't know how much you follow the NFL, but you have someone like Jaden Daniels, who's a starting quarterback for the Washington Commanders. He's having a pretty good season. You got Bo Nix, who doing great with the Denver Broncos. These are both like first round draft pick quarterbacks that are immediately starting for their teams as soon as they get into the NFL, and that's why they're going to be in the rookie of the year race. But then you have someone like Michael Penix Jr., who is a first round quarterback draft pick for the Atlanta Falcons. He has barely seen the field this year, but he is now about to start playing for Kirk Cousins. Like, apparently, like this will be his first week starting coming up in the next few days after this comes out. And so my question to you will then be, well, does Michael Penix Jr. all of a sudden have to be a part of like this rookie of the year race this year because he's about to get to play like the tail end of the season? Or is he going to not have to worry about that, and will his true rookie year be like next year if he's a starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons for the 2025 NFL season? Like, I do think that even sometimes in traditional sports, you do wind up with like these weird situations where like, yeah, technically you're a rookie, but like you really didn't get to see the field or the court or whatever the case may be to the same degree as like your peers. And when we're talking about someone like Donk, like you're right, like he has been playing professional Counter-Strike against like top teams since 2021. You know, that's kind of where he came on the scene with the Spirit Academy team. But let's be honest, he didn't play any LANs until 2023, and there was only 2 LANs that entire 2023 season that he played, and only really one of them was like a decent sized one. And so like at the end of the day, I think what you're probably going to have to do is just start calling people's rookie years like a year in which they actually played a certain number of like tier 1 lands or something. Like I don't know, like eventually you're going to have to come up with some type of definition or some type of rule set. And I don't know if this will be HLTV with like their award system, or whether it would be like another league if they do an award system like an ESL rookie of the year, or you know, a Blast rookie of the year, whatever the case may be, where it's going to ultimately have to come down to like, you know, a year in which you actually put a decent number of reps at like a tier 1 LAN level before you're going to be considered like that's your rookie season. But I do think you're right. Like, it is unfortunate for Ultimate that this is indeed like technically his rookie year. He did play a bunch of tier 1 lands with Liquid, and so he's not going to be able to make that claim for a rookie season next season, despite the fact that he obviously, you know, didn't come in until like halfway through the year for Liquid in comparison to someone like Donk, who was with Spirit the entire time. So it is murky waters, but I feel like you run into this in a lot of other situations too. I don't know.
Go on.
Yeah. I mean, I would just answer the question by saying, yeah, I do feel like if you're the player that's getting in for Kirk Cousins, if he's, yeah, you kind of forfeit your rookie year. Like, that's it. Like, you're not going to be in the rookie of the year conversation because now you have a leg up over the competition you've played in that circumstance against, you know, the NFL players. So, yeah, like, is that guy going to relish the opportunity to do that and play this like 1 week? Obviously, he's not going to sit. I mean, you know, it'd be interesting. Like, I forgot how Ben Simmons' case worked, where he like didn't play at all in his rookie year. He might have maybe been able to at some point, but then he couldn't have won rookie of the year in the next season. I might also just be making up that last part where it's like he forfeited that bit of time and decided to recover instead, because rookie of the year has it has more implications in a space that's more like the NFL or the NBA, because when you win rookie of the year, you'll usually then get endorsements because of that.
Right.
So there would be a reason to do it. But in Counter-Strike, no, you're going to take the tier 1 salary as soon as you're offered it. Like, Ultimate isn't going to say, yeah, thanks Liquid, but I want to start January 1st with you guys because I want to have a rookie of the year potential. It's like, we don't really reward you for anything for being rookie of the year. There isn't even an HLTV award on the ballot right now for rookie of the year. It's just something that we use in narrative building.
I feel like you just all got completely lost in the narratives of just literally what does a semantic word mean, and then actually reply guide each other a million times over on all the fine details. Yeah. For me, the whole premise of rookie, which Maui's point is about, isn't that Donk isn't a rookie. It's that essentially Donk, and you can also apply this to Monacy, the same thing applied to him when he came in 2022. We are just getting a type of person now who is a rookie in the traditional sense in Counter-Strike, as in they're just entering real tier 1 lands, but they have a level of experience, sometimes even against the opposition that are the current players they're going to play, that was impossible in the past. It never existed. And so essentially rookies now are more battle tested, have actually played those people. There's not the same surprise factor for them that they used to be in the past, or for us for that matter, by the way. We can be somewhat more assured they actually are a real legit prospect. Whereas not only in Counter-Strike did that not exist, but it never existed in sports. Like, actually, if you think back, one of the biggest deals, like the NFL is probably the best example ever. The NFL is the ultimate sport for people to be busts, so a high round draft draft picks. Because what happens is that is a sport where absolutely physical capacity gives you advantages over other people. And so when you have the person who mega dominates in college level, whether it's the quarterback or running back, whatever it might be, the gap can look so huge that you expect them to just become like the best NFL player. And then sometimes don't even become competent. Sometimes they're just like they're non-existent when other people are even, or they've never played against such high level competition, or crucially, a classic one in the NFL is you've never played against real NFL coaching. You just played in a system where you could just do what you want in your rinky-dink little region, and then you had to play like one real ball game or something like that, So the difference is in esports, yes, absolutely, everyone, especially every European player, is completely acclimatized. Like another reason people underrate for the Monacies and the Donks is they already played all the other star players in FPL. Even they've actually won duels against Simple and Zebu. Like for them, that's not the same as if you hear a story back in like the 90s of like when Kobe first sees Michael Jordan on the court, like, oh my God, that's Michael Jordan. This is as if he'd played like 50 scrimmages against him just the last month. Like, yeah, it'd still be. Yeah. Here's the thing though, as I've made the point there though, they still are rookies in the sense though, they haven't actually done it though. It's all well and good to play a million practice games, a million scrims. If being good in scrims made you good, I can tell you what, that HLTV list would have to be 100 names long, guys. There's a million people carry scrims and never do it in the real game. The problem I have is this, is it is still different to go to a LAN, to fly there, to put on that jersey, to walk out, do the whole thing, and then bomb and go last place. Like, that isn't the same as going, oh, well, bad FPL game, bad scrim, go next. Like, that's a different kettle of fish. And so for me, that's also why I don't make it so specific. Like, for example, if someone did get injured in their rookie season in a sport, they probably are then ineligible to be the rookie next season or something like that. But for me, they would still be a rookie the next season because I'm using rookie as the colloquial term to mean you haven't had much experience. You're still fresh to the scene. You're still fresh to all of that. It's why actually the worst area I run into this problem is in League of Legends. They have a Rookie of the Split award back in the day, like per 3 months. So they would get mad if you said someone was a rookie when they're like 8 months into their career. Say, oh, shut the fuck up. I'm using it as a colloquial term, you dickhead. By the way, I extend rookie depending on the player. It's like I said about Brolan. Brolan actually at this point in time is like a 6-year-long career, boys. But because he had a couple that were online that don't feel like real CS, for me, he's only just gotten out of being like a rookie type figure. Like that can last 2 years sometimes, I think. Depends what type of person you are, what sort of role you have, how you bed in even. By the way, some people maybe go through it. Maybe they need 3 months to be a rookie and then suddenly they're just good. So like, if anything, if you looked at how Donk plays, he doesn't play like a rookie. In that sense, he's not a rookie, but he just is in terms of raw experience. So I think there was a point to be made there by Maui, but I imagine as usual, people will just get lost in the weeds on it. It's all good. It's all good. Right. There is one last sponsor for today, and this is one of my favourites. It is actually, I think, forget just holiday season. It's one of the best gifts I think you can actually buy a friend or a family member or even a girlfriend or something. I think this is actually a next level gift because not only have I got the ones I got sent out. I'm going to actually buy some more. I want an even bigger one of the really big frames. But also, I know everyone that I've talked to who's got it so far raves about this one. And it is the Aura digital frame. Where what it is, it's the number one digital photo frame, according to Wirecutter. And basically, it is super easy to use. It just looks like a normal picture frame, but instead of having a physical printed out or however you develop photos in the old fashion, I don't even know what you call that, when you just develop a piece of photo, because it's digital, as you can imagine, you can fit loads of photos in there. It's not just that one image. You can put a cycle of a whole bunch of them. And one of the coolest features of this is actually, it's mega when you have relatives that aren't super tech literate because it's super easy to set up. Or you're going to pair it, by the way, so if you give it to your grandma or your mum, so that you yourself can access it and basically upload photos while you're you could be on the other side of the world, absolutely quite literally. In Monty's case, that's happening. His parents live in Denver, and then his bloody family's living in Korea, the other side. So either way, wherever he is, he's sending pictures of his kids to the other ones. And the reason it's mega is once you set it up for them, it doesn't require a subscription. It doesn't need USB things or adding in memory cards. You just set it up. It's all good to go. Once you've got it set up in their house, then basically, if they know what they're doing, you can obviously tell them how to use it all, but you can just control it basically. And so I actually think the reason it's a mega gift is, one, if you actually have a family and you have an elderly relative, they're going to think this is awesome. First of all, they love things like photos, and also you can't reach it. You don't call your mum every week like everyone thinks they should, like a good boy. So this is the way you can also keep in touch in that way. You put in the newest photos of you when you're out and about. You can also, by the way, set it up so it could you can send photos to a bunch of different people. You can send them more than one. Also, if you've got a girlfriend or something, they're going to think, oh, you're too busy gaming. So what you do is you set this up and you put like 500 cool photos of you all out on trips and days out and pictures of her that she looked cute. And that's going to be really heartfelt when that cycles through on the frame and she sees that. Like, I actually think that's why I always say the upside on this gift is mega, because it's really easy on your end, but I actually think the impact it can have on the other person is mega. I mean, imagine this. A classic thing from a sappy movie would be someone would make you a photo album back in the day, you know, a girlfriend, or they'd make you, just to remind. This is like that, but it's super easy. You just do it there, put a bunch of stuff in, sort of like the equivalent of a cloud, and just update it regularly. And it's super easy. Also, by the way, it has all sorts of features built in, like it can like tell when it's the same person and bunch them together if you want and make those go in the same cycle. You can change how often it flips between the pictures. It even has quite a cool intuitive thing on the frame itself, which just looks like the Carver black frame, which looks like a classic photo frame. It even has a very simple feature where when it goes to the next photo, if you want to go back to the last one, like turning the page of a book, you just stroke your finger along the top like that and it moves to the last picture again, or you can move to the next one. It's actually one of the most intuitive like features I've ever seen for a gift. So I think it's a mega gift for everyone to consider. By the way, I will say it's only people in the US who can use this code here. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's not applicable to the rest of the world. We're going to try and fix that for next year. So save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get, as you can see on the screen, $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames by using the promo code S&B, all one word, at checkout. That's AURA frames.com, promo code S&B. This deal is exclusive to our listeners, so get yours now. By the way, I think this is a great gift at any time of year. Terms and conditions apply, obviously. Actually, interesting detail, dusT, completely independent of us, actually did buy one.
I bought two of them, actually. And so I have no financial ties here at all. This is just strictly because I thought it was a great product. I've actually bought two of them, one of which I bought for my fiance's mother, who is kind of fits right in that category that you're talking about, of like someone who's not like up to date with tech and stuff like that. And we're already setting it up for her, so that way whenever she opens it up on Christmas morning, it already is preloaded with photos and stuff like that. And it has been an incredible product, super easy to use, and like it's going to be perfect for what we wanted. So yeah, it is a great product. Like vouching it as someone who's bought a couple of them.
Yeah, as I said, like I'm not a fraud. Like I wouldn't say that. By the way, if there was a product I didn't think was good, I would do the ad read. First of all, I wouldn't actually have it on this thing if I thought it wasn't good, but I would just do the ad read if I thought it was average. Like if I say it, other people are saying that it's legit. Also, we have got one more point on the show. So my ugly point, I've served it right up. This is the alley-oop to end the year. Even though you're all doing that corporate, like, yeah, it's up here, it's not bad though, you know, sort of the way they... No, the ugly has to be Team Liquid's roster. And the reason I picked ugly is because here's the problem. If you think about when they first made this exact roster, actually, I think the reason people were fine with it, beyond a few people go mad on Reddit or whatever, is actually it looked like a temporary roster. It looks like actually there's no commitment that there has to be the full roster. You know, if the Ultimate guy doesn't work out, no problem. If your Kindar's game doesn't pick up, maybe we can pivot and we can get one of these big rifles we spent the whole episode talking about. Actually, if anything, it looked to me more like the current roster was a response to the super team failure and sort of figuring out, let's test the rest of the squad and see, can just IGL, can this work with this guy? Can we pick up this player over here? Is your Kindar better when Cadian's got it? It was supposed to answer a lot of questions. My problem is, it has answered those questions, but I feel like at the end of the year, making top 8 of the major has made a lot of people think like, it's fine to just keep this roster though. This roster's okay. Whereas for me, I have to say, I'm going to do a whole Substack piece on this soon. I think this roster actually peaked and has already gone down. Like, I actually think you can keep this roster. Here's my statement. You can keep this roster if you would like to be the 8th best team of 2025. But if you'd actually like to be in some finals and be like we were talking about Mouz, where you're potential to be one of the best, and you can cook and you can go deep, you can win trophy. By the way, I had a hot take. They'd never get close to winning a trophy in this lineup. That's fucking played out like a peach, boys. So if you don't know, one of the issues they had in this team, by the way, I think this proves that this lineup cannot work, is that they played 1 fucking billion games of dusT 2, and at the end of the season, they have a 12% win rate on it. It is actually dusT 2! Like, if you don't know, that's like saying you don't even have people clicking left mouse button. Like, what are you talking about? You are an NA team that's supposed to have fraggers. You can't win on dusT 2. Pack it up. Pack it in. Let me, yeah, whatever. You know the way way that rhyme goes. So anyway, I'm just saying, there's my ugly Team Liquid's roster right now, because what's sad about it is I don't think there are obvious fixes. Because, for example, Ultimate probably did enough to earn a spot again, but he's the AWPer. So at the same time, you look out there, that's where you want a big name player normally. Your Kindar, by the way, everyone in Liquid loves him. That's real. But I'll tell you what, they are also aware he fucking loses a lot of games for you. So I think they're in a really tough spot right now. By the way, if we're all going to talk shit on Falcons, do you think loads of top 20 HLTV players are signing up to have Twisters or IGL? You can think what you want, mate. So I think they're in a really tough spot. That's why I put ugly, not bad though, dusT. I do think you can fix this. I think it's only like maybe might even only be one player away, but who the fuck knows who it is and who knows how you make this work. So I think it's a tough spot to be in. What are your thoughts?
All right. So here's the thing. With Liquid, with the move, like it obviously had to happen because the whole Cadian thing and like the Skull thing just wasn't working out. So they had to pull like a big play here, okay? And it started out strong, right? Like they had that Blast Fall group, they beat NAVI twice, and like they looked like a good team. But the problem is like for the rest of the year, unfortunately, Liquid was the team that could beat anyone ranked at or below their level, but they could just not beat like anyone ranked above them. Yes. And worst yet, their nemesis was FaZe, which was a team that was dropping off throughout the course of the year, and they could just never beat FaZe. And like FaZe was like not even really a top 5 team. No. Like they were kind of a gatekeeper to the top 5, but they themselves weren't really a part of it. So the fact that Liquid could never figure out the FaZe matchup was a huge problem for them because FaZe knocked them out of like 4 tournaments or something like that? Yeah. So that was a huge problem for them, for one. And then for 2, after those wins against NAVI, the only other time that they beat like a top-ranked team in the world is when they beat Spear at the Blast Fall final. And then even still, it didn't wind up mattering because they placed 5th, 6th because they lost to Vitality and FaZe right afterwards. Yes, they did make top 8 this major, but at the end of the day, it's exactly like you said. Like, if you don't touch this roster at all, at best, they're going to be like maybe a top 8 team in the world, probably top 10, never really going to threaten top 5. The only things that I saw this team like really improve in is the fact that they did indeed. I think their Ancient and Anubis were actually pretty mega. Like, I think they did get those 2 maps under wraps. I also did see them make improvements on Inferno, and by the end of the year, I do feel like that was actually another pretty decent map for them. But you're right, their dusT 2 was absolute trash. Their Mirage was trash. Their Nuke wasn't really that good. They obviously couldn't play Vertigo. So their map pool never really got to a point where they could truly be competitive. And yeah, like I said, at the end of the day, they could just never really beat like that team like ranked like a spot or 2 ahead of them to really jump up the poll. Now, I'll also say this is like we never got to see them play Mongols or Heroic, which is kind of sad because it would have been cool to see like if they could have at least beaten like another like top 8-ish team. If they couldn't beat the top 5 squads, at least let me see if they can beat like another team like kind of at or similar to their level, but it never happened. And also, I don't think they ever got to play Mouse Sports. So like I never know like how they would have fared there either in a head-to-head matchup. But obviously they weren't beating the other top 5 teams. And look, I think at the end of the day, if you keep this team, you're probably right. Like unless they somehow figure out ways to improve their Mirage and dusT 2, like they're never really going to get anywhere as a team. But I do think that you're also right that you could I think you can make one roster change at least, and that would help things out. I don't know if it would be enough, but like the obvious ones you can, right? Like obviously that is just a player that at this point has to go. He's just been there for so long, and I'm not trying to like hate on him or anything like that. Like he actually did get a little bit better at entry fragging at this tournament compared to like other points this year, but similar to like the magixx having a live series in, you know, the grand finals of the major, it's not enough to just give you immunity, you know, to be able to continue on for another year on this team. Sadly enough, I know this is fucking wild, but the pick could just be Elise for Yakindar. That literally could be it. Like, I know it's so stupid to say that because Elise's already been on Liquid like a million times, but like that actually could work. Or just give me any other entry fragger that like puts up reputable numbers to go alongside twisT, and this team actually still could be good. Now look, I'm not saying that like I'm entirely sold on twisT being an IGL going forward long term. Like the other obvious move that you have to consider if you're Liquid right now, besides replacing a Kinnard with their entry fragger, is indeed just putting, you know, twisT back into star rifle roles and then having like another IGL come in and like lead this team and look at that as another option. But it's one of those things where like I did at least see something from twisT as an IGL. Like on certain maps, like I said, Ancient and Anubis were the 2 big ones for me, and then an Inferno improved as well, to where it's like there is still a chance that he can mold into something as an IGL. I just don't know if that's necessarily the most optimal route for him and for Liquid as an organization. So I don't completely disagree with you. I think there is like a change or 2 there that could make this team better for sure. Otherwise, you're right, probably just going to be like top 8 at best.
Yeah, I think that a couple things with individuals. I think you have to obviously talk about Yakindar, which you did adequately. So I'm not really, dude's obviously just not regained the form from what now 2 years ago. So it feels like at this point you're just holding on because they're not an org with infinite money. So with Ultimate also, I feel like it's such whiplash with Ultimate for judging him because he came onto the space, very impressive, a few great events in a row, like, his Cologne and his EPL were great, but then he just bottom frags at the fall final, Rio, the world final, and then he comes back into the major cycle and looks pretty competent against, half decent teams, but then in like the last month, it's the kind of the same thing. When he reaches against elite opposition, he has been figured out more or less. Like, you can't have a guy that's your star opera against top 10 opponents have a sub 1.0 rating, which he does. So that's like, it's just that his game needs to be fleshed out more in the mid-late round because he's like he's such, like, I don't know if there's really an opera that I find more feast or famine other than Ultimate now. Like, he's either just going to absolutely dominate the opponents because every opening pick that he goes for is going to work, or he's going to just be a complete hindrance to the team because he's just going to give the other team 5v4s because he's just going to feed at the beginning of rounds. So I don't really know if that's the kind of guy I want on my team. Like, I rate Torzy pretty highly, and like he's such a more balanced opper. Like he can go for those picks. He can play mid rounds. He's actually fairly clutch too. His rifle's decent too. Like same with Ultimate, but like in terms of also little micro things, like Liquid's dusT too. Like looking at it just a little bit more, they're like the only team that I've seen that just don't run mid to B ever. Like there was this quote someone I think had from Rio that was something along the lines of, oh, like mid to B isn't very good anymore because you can break the smokes. And I think Liquid are a team that, because they don't have an actually really experienced in-game leader, I think twisT tries to take shortcuts. And by this, I mean, like the case in point example of this is that when somebody in the space that's a more tenured in-game leader, and I forgot who said this, unfortunately, but when a more touted in-game leader says something like, oh, people don't do mid to Bs on dusT 2 that much anymore, twisT takes that at face value and says, okay, guys, we're never running a mid to B ever again. And for the last 6 dusT 2 games, they never ran a mid to B. They never did mid to B one time. So, like, I think twisT just tries to take that. But then when you're prepping for a team and they're never going to run mid to B, well, now I don't need a mid to B defender. Like, I don't need to have a guy in CT spawn ever. My A defense is stronger. My B defense is stronger. I can probably push long A little bit more. You're just gonna, when you simplify your calling because you think that there's a meta and you want to play into that meta, then because you're playing so according to that, everybody knows what it is that you're doing. And so I think that twisT has a lot to level up in terms of his game. And so moving forward from this, yeah, it's an ugly point because if you just kept this roster, I kind of agree. I think you're going to hover from like top 6 in the world to top 10th in the world for the next year, because I don't think there's really another gear for them to give with this iteration. But if I were to do anything, I'm going to look at the IGL free agents. I'm going to look at HooXi. I'm going to really consider that. I'm going to think about Nexa. I'm going to, anybody
Snappy.
else that maybe Snappy. Yeah, I'm going to think about Snappy. There's a lot of pieces here that you could definitely work with. I don't think that twisT and NAV would want to work with Snappy because Snappy runs more set pieces than the other guys I just mentioned. Like HooXi gives more freedom, Nexa gives more freedom, and twisT and NAV, given that they wanted more freedom from Cadian, I don't think that the more set piece IGL that Snappy and Cadian are is going to really meld with how they want to play and see the game. So I also think that in one way, JKS has kind of been getting a free pass on this team for a while. Like he's an okay anchor, and he's to me he's been better than Skulls, okay, but he's still also not like that great against top opposition either, which Skulls wasn't. Like so maybe the communication issue is better because Skulls seem to have some problems. Like now that he's playing with Fury, he just looks a lot better, and I think JKS is probably easier to work with. His first language is English, so I wouldn't go to JKS. Let's just say that. I would look at Ultimate. I would look at twisT. I would say, do we want to replace any of these guys? Or not twisT. Sorry, Yakindar. I would look at Yakindar and say, yeah, this is the most obvious piece to replace. And I'd say that instead of getting another entry fragger for Twist, I would just say get an in-game leader. You know, someone. I think the 1-to-1 pick for me is still Hooksy. I'd say Hooksy is if I get Hooksy for your Kindar, he's going to actually take up many of the same roles on T side. CT side a little bit more that you'd have to think about, but then you get to make Naf a rotator player, which he could totally do, by the way. And then you have Naf in rotator positions, Hooksy on entry duty, Twist second in, JKS is still the lurk player. Ultimate probably is going to get used in a way that, like, I think Hooksy knows how to use Oppers better than Twist does, for example. So I would probably go for that. If you said, like, gun to your head, what move do you make for Liquid right now? That's it.
Yeah, for me, it's like the order of operations is you definitely are just like replacing a Kindar. And then the option is like, are you going to try to keep Twist in IGL or are you going to pick up another one? And that's a decision that Liquid has to make as an organization. Twist has to think about as a player long-term for his future. And I just don't know what the answer to that question is. I think you could go either way. Like, I've seen enough from Twist as an IGL to think that maybe he could continue to evolve and you could just get another entry fragger and this team could obviously be better than what they are now just by having more opening potential. But I also can see it from my perspective where, like, why would you... It's the same argument that you're going to make about Nico. It's the same argument you're going to make about Nico, where it's like, do we really want to waste like Nico's ability as a star rifler to put him in an IGL slot for like Falcons or some shit instead of like having magixx do it, or like you actually pick up an IGL for Falcons or something like that? It's the same, you know, debate that they had to go through when they decided to ultimately pick up Snacks as an IGL instead of making Nico the IGL through this last roster rotation.
But let's just even with Twist, like, do we really want 0.96 rated Twist? Because that's what he had at the major. Do we want that? Like as an in-game like for the last 3 months, you know, he's at a 1.04 against all opposition, no filters. It's like, dude, I would rather have an in-game leader. And because the thing is, for the first 6 months of this year, Twist was their best player by far. He had a chance at reaching the top 20. He has no chance. Like, he is not a top 20 rated player anymore. Like, it's almost, there has to be a give and take here. And when he's calling, their T sides on multiple maps are still bad. He has played worse as an individual, and so like just cut it. Just I'm done with it. Like I don't like. Yes, he might develop more tactically, but the cost is already his individual ability. He went from being like, you know, this like 1 point. Like, I would have said Twist was probably one of the 10 best riflers in CS2, and now he's like a top 100 rifler as an in-game leader. He didn't maintain that skill. Like, he doesn't have that skill anymore while he's calling. Like, it's what happens to every in-game leader. The beginning is like, oh, cool, I have all... Like, it's like Electronic on Navi. If you remember when he switched over as the in-game leader for them, the first event, he maintained all of his skill and then got to work with the system that was already available. But then... in not that long, he started falling off as an individual player. The calling also got worse. And like, that's what the honeymoon gives you a lot. But now I'm starting to see what the stabilization looks like. And for Twist, it is a slightly above average fragging in-game leader, but it is a mediocre, even like well subpar calling in-game leader. So I don't want that on a team.